Hello, I'm Leanne Tiemann, author of the Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul series and creator of Self-Care for Healthcare. And I want to give you a dose of that year-long program right now. I think you'll probably agree that not much has really changed since I graduated from nursing school. Back then, my very first job was on a post-op surgical unit, and we were so busy, you might not even believe it. They expected us to take care of 4 patients at the same time. Fortunately then, some of them were 10-day vaginal post-op hysterectomies or 3-day post-op hernia repairs, but in spite of that heavy load, we gave excellent care, which of course meant giving the patient a nice, long, complete bed bath, a 10-minute back rub, you know, that everyday kind of care we give. Sometimes on the evening shift, I got to be the charge nurse. But usually the charge nurse was an older nurse. I mean, she had to be 50. Now, she lovingly called me Brat. I lovingly called her Poston. I made it up. P-O-S-T-E-N. It stood for Poor Old Sick and Tired Elderly Nurse. Now, Poston used to go on and on to us brats about how they used to do things in the old days. So here it is. 2020 and 2021, and I have young friends who are nurses, and they're young. They must be like 30. And sometimes I'm only trying to explain to them so they have an appreciation of how we used to do things, and that's when I realize I'm that old nurse now. I'm Poston. And sometimes it feels like everything has changed. No longer do we have time to give complete bed baths. We barely have time to give baths at all. Nurses go home at the end of their shifts with achy feet and achy hearts, feeling like the care they gave was adequate at best, because the acuity of the care is just so much harder today. Hospitals are becoming intensive care units. Nursing homes are becoming hospitals, and homes are becoming nursing homes. No wonder it's so stressful. I think one Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul contributor told it best. She said, you know, working 3 to 11 at a long-term health care facilities, never easy, yet everybody there loved the residents. Couldn't help but have a favorite. Alice was this wry, spry, sparkling blue-eyed little lady. Now, her only living relative, though, was her son Jack, this great big burly guy with long, scraggly beard, long, greasy hair. Tattoos covered his arms and his chest, and no matter what the weather was, Jack always wore a tank top, so the dragons and snakes could be admired by everybody. He was rough, gruff, mean. The nurses were actually afraid of him. They'd hear him sneak in at unpredictable times of the night and day to check up on them. They'd hear him roar up on his motorcycle. That front door would fling open, and they'd hear the click, click, click of Jack's boots announcing his arrival. Well, one evening was the worst shift ever. 3 nursing assistants called in sick. The trays came late, and they were cold. And in the midst of this, one resident fell and broke his hip. So here's this good nurse standing in the nurse's station, trying to do the work of 4 people. She's almost in tears. We've been there, haven't we? And she heard that front door fling open and the click, click, click. She knew Jack was right there glaring at her, but she said, if I would have looked at him, I would have cried out loud. Instead, he stomped down the hall and visited his mama, as often he did. Well, finally, at the end of this horrible shift, this nurse single-handedly had every single resident cared for and nestled in for the night. And exhausted, she just put her head on the desk for a few minutes' deep breath, and she heard that front door fling open and the click, click. Oh, Jack caught me. Sure enough, she raised her head, and here's this great big burly hand, and in the tattooed arm, he was holding a pickle jar with a piece of pink twine tied around the neck in a bow. And in it was one of the most beautiful long stem red roses she'd ever seen. Jack handed it to her and said, looks like you're having a bad night. Well, this is from me and my mama. And she said, you know, of any gift she has ever received from any resident or family, nothing has touched her heart like that pickle jar and rose now 40 years ago. We could use a few more pickle jars and roses in our lives, couldn't we? It's so hard, it's stressful. We have to remember, though, that not all stress is bad. There's that good kind of stress called eustress. Now, I had heard of euphoria. I had never heard of eustress. I learned it was a healthy stress that every living biological life form has that allows that life form to go on and be productive when everything's changing. And everything's always changing. So we need some stress. But enough already, right? The American Surgeon General says 80% of non-traumatic deaths in the United States are stress-related. 80%. So what causes all that stress for those of us in healthcare? Well, the lists are really long, I'm sure. But the short list I hear most often includes things like just feeling like we have way too much to do and not enough time and resources to get it all done. Feeling like we're given huge assignments in life, sometimes personally and professionally, and feeling like we don't have everything we need to do it right and wanting to do it right. Feeling like we give 100%. Some days we give 110%, but it's like it's not enough. No matter what I do, it's never enough. The stress of being pulled between home and work and volunteerism, or maybe going back to school. The stress of illnesses perhaps, or finances, or relationships, or of COVID. And if a person has one or two of these in their lives, they can usually cope. But if we get more than one or two, not only are we not in eustress or stress, we get in distress. Are you ever in distress? How would I know, you ask? I've been this way so long. That's why I made a list of symptoms of too much stress in your life. It's from my Self-Care for Healthcare book. So put a little mental check by any of these that might apply to you. Physical symptoms of too much stress might include appetite changes, headaches, fatigue, poor sleeping, frequent illnesses, digestive problems, a pounding heart, teeth grinding, rash, restlessness, foot tapping, finger drumming, smoking, increased alcohol intake. And friends, there are mental symptoms from too much stress. Forgetfulness. Hope that's not a big one or I am in trouble. Forgetful. Oh, sorry. Poor concentration, dulled senses, lethargy, boredom, low productivity, a negative attitude, anxiety, the blues, mood swings, anger, bad dreams, irritability, crying spells, nervous laughter, a loss of a loving feeling in our lives. And friends, there are spiritual symptoms from too much stress. Feelings of emptiness, loss of meaning, doubt, martyrdom, loss of direction, cynicism, apathy, abandonment, worry, isolation, distrust, a feeling like nobody cares. So we have some of the causes. We have a list of the symptoms. So what do we do about it? Well, that's where I come in with Self-Care for Healthcare, because in order to be strong enough to cope with all the stressors we have in our lives, we've got to be strong, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And to be strong in these three ways, we have to nurture ourselves in these three ways every single day. We can't just wait for weekends to catch up, to sleep in late, eat a big breakfast, and go to church. We need to take time every day, even in 15-minute increments, to get our bodies the care we need, physically, mentally, and spiritually. But as I travel this continent talking to health caregivers, I'm more convinced than ever that we are so busy taking care of other people, you don't always take very good care of yourselves. You treat yourselves in ways that we would never treat somebody we loved or cared for. Can you imagine saying to somebody you love, "You can't have anything to eat today. No, sir, I'm not going to feed you. Nothing. Too busy. Just too busy. Besides what you ate way too much yesterday." We know how to eat right. We teach people how to eat right. We know we're supposed to drink 6 glasses of water a day. How simple could that be? But how often do we nurture ourselves with the quantity and quality of food and drink we know our bodies need? We neglect to sleep. We would never deprive a child of sleep. We know it makes them sick and grumpy. So why would we do that to ourselves? Research proves that the human body requires 7 to 8 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. If we're not giving it that, we are actually increasing our blood pressures, depleting our immune systems, shortening our lifespans, increasing our fatty deposits. Now I have your attention. Yeah, a shortened lifespan was one thing, but fatty deposits? You're going to bed. Now, it distresses me to learn that the average 12-hour shift worker gets 5 hours of sleep a night. What are we doing to ourselves? 80% of Americans said they would get the required 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night if they didn't have the internet or a device. I'm thinking, who's the boss of them? How are you going to turn off technology, turn off electricity to get your body the sleep it needs? And exercise. Now, maybe you were up this morning and went to the gym way before you came to work, or maybe you're somebody a little bit like me who seems to have a really hard time committing to exercise every single day. That's why we appreciate, don't we, all the research now proving that 45 minutes of brisk walking has the same cardiovascular benefit as jogging. So surely we can walk, right? And now we're running out of excuses. They find that it can be cumulative. You do 15 minutes here, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, and it all adds up. Surely we can find 15-minute increments to get some exercise. And this is what I always imagine Mama laughing down from heaven, because for all generations before us, men and women got their exercise from their everyday activities. Now in America, we tend to pay other people to do things for us sometimes. We pay people to wash our cars and clean our houses, and so we have time to go to a health club and work out. And then we get there and drive round and round and round looking for a parking place closer to the door so we don't have to walk so far to get our exercise. How are you going to pay attention, even in 15-minute increments, to get your body the nutrition and fluids, the sleep, and the exercise you know it needs, and it really does deserve? Now there's that second part of our lives we have to keep in balance. That's our mental selves. And in this chaotic, hectic world we are living in, it is crucial that we take time every day for mental rest. And one of the very best ways to do that, really is the very best, is just that it's so simple, we discount it. And that's by taking time every day, several times a day, to stop and breathe. Slow, deep, easy breathing, the kind they taught us in childbirth class or they teach in yoga, where you breathe in 2, 3, 4, and out 2, 3, 4, and in 2, 3, 4, and out. That slow, deep, easy, rhythmic breathing releases a lot of stress, a lot of tension, a lot of endorphins in our brains. I read in a nursing journal that endorphins have the same molecular makeup as morphine. And we have this on tap, and forget to utilize it by doing rhythmic things like walking, jogging, laughing, breathing. It's also a great coping skill. One I learned the hard way. Perhaps you haven't heard about me, but at the end of the Vietnam War, I was actually caught up in helping to bring babies from Vietnam to their pre-assigned adoptive homes in the United States. 6 of them. 6. Between the time I said, yes, I will go, and the day before I left, the bombing went from 100 miles outside of Saigon to right outside the city limits. And when I got there, I was greeted with these words. Have you heard the news? Last night, President Gerald Ford okayed Operation Baby Lift. You won't help us take out 6 babies. You'll help us take out 300. 300. Well, I was a nurse working pediatrics. Nothing had prepared me for what I was about to witness and be a part of. I walked into this 2-story center that normally housed just 10 babies that were too sick to be in our foster homes. But now they're gathering babies in from all of the foster homes, from all the other orphanages, and I go into the downstairs where every inch of floor is covered with a baby. And then I went upstairs where there were seas and seas of babbling, burping, bawling babies. This is the first picture taken of me in Vietnam. I was holding this little girl with a shaved head. I'll never forget it. I remember saying to my friend Carol, who was with me, take this, my very first photo here in Vietnam. And then, friends, on the 3rd day I was there, a miracle happened. the director said, "Leanne, we know that you and your husband Mark have applied adoption of a son through this organization, and we know you expect him in 2 or 3 years. That's normal. Well, because of Operation Baby Lift, we're going to be assigning one of these babies to you when we get to the United States, or you can walk into the next room and choose a son." And I walked into that room of 100 babies. And across the room, standing next to a crib, was a little 9-month-old boy. Pinching the toes of the baby inside should have been a hint. But that little fella took one look at me, got down on his hands and knees, and crawled across the room into my arms, my heart, and our family. We had a son. This is Mitch on my right knee. Now, it's my absolute conviction God created this child to be our son. No clue I was conceived in another womb or born in another land, because I know with all my heart God made him only for us. And if I would have had a doubt, it would have been erased. Because the week I got back from Vietnam, Carol came racing to my house one day. "Leanne, do you remember that first picture you had me take?" Oh, I'll never forget. I was holding that little girl with the shaved head. She said, "Well, I have that photo here, and there's only one other person in the background. Mitch, 3 days before he picked me, just waiting for his mama." Now I had a mission within the mission, but getting all the babies to the airport was not easy. Did you even know you can fit 22 in a Volkswagen van? And apparently there's even room for 2 more. Then we took the babies to the airport, where there was a C-141 cargo jet, huge empty airplane. But today it wasn't empty. They had 22 cardboard boxes side by side. And we placed 3 to 4 babies in a cardboard box. Then, believing in seatbelt safety, we took a strap from one end of the plane over the 22 boxes and secured it on the other. There were 9 of us to take care of 100 babies. Imagine your worst shift ever. I'll never forget sitting there cross-legged on the floor. I have a baby here, propping a bottle, watching my son, propping a bottle, and friends, that's when I started that slow, deep, easy breathing. You see, the same breathing I had used to bring our daughters into our family, now I was using to bring our son. And when people see this, and a picture of my family all grown up today, and see that my baby girl adopted a baby girl and a baby boy from Mississippi, and when they see that on the 25th anniversary of Operation Baby Lift, I got to go to a reunion and stand before 100 young men and women, many of whom I helped to bring out. And it was on that same 25th anniversary year that President Gerald Ford heard I was going to be in the same town he was going to be in. And he asked if he could meet me. He asked if he could have his picture taken with me. I said, "I don't know, I'm kind of busy." But what a privilege it was to meet President Ford. And when he introduced me that day, he said that I was a hero. And I said, "No, sir, I am no hero. I was just an ordinary person caught up in an extraordinary circumstance." Now, it's unlikely that you are ever going to be asked to rescue babies in a cardboard boxes in a third world country in the middle of a war. But God knows you rescue people every day with what you do. Don't forget to use your breathing as your first mental balance tool. And there's a second mental balance tool I really believe in, and that's the power of positive thinking. I read that book by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale when I was just in my 20s, and I knew he was right. We get what we expect in life. We get what we think about. We get what we visualize. That's a little scary. Then a surgeon, Bernie Siegel, took it to another level. He realized that his patients who had positive thinking and visualization were getting better when others weren't. So he quit his day job to do scientific research to prove that what you think about can actually change your body function. One of his very first case studies was of a little boy, 6 years old, and he had inoperable brain tumor. So his nurses and his wonderful staff taught him to do some visualization. He said that tumor was this great, big, ugly, stupid thing in his head, And he was going to visualize every day rockets blasting that big, ugly, stupid thing. And he said he was visualizing this every single day. And one night he went to his daddy and said, I can't find my tumor anymore. They took him back to the doctor, repeated the CAT scans, and the tumor was gone. What took me too long to wrap my head around is, our bodies and minds don't distinguish the difference between a visualization and experience. They react as if they both happened. That's why they use it in sports. Half the basketball team can shoot free throws for an hour. The other half can visualize shooting free throws perfectly for an hour. And at the competition, the results were the same. Our bodies and minds don't distinguish the difference between experience and visualization. Your mind is a computer. You control the input. How are you going to use positive thinking and visualization to change not only your health, but your happiness and even your workplace? Now there's a third mental balance tool we too often forget to utilize. This good nurse didn't. She was from Minnesota and transferred to Texas. She said it was kind of a culture shock. No longer did she hear people say, how are you doing? She heard them say, ¿Cómo estás? It was a largely Hispanic population. She loved her job in post-op recovery. One day, the OR nurse wheeled a man into her cubicle and gave a report. This is Mr. Martinez. He's a 60-year-old Hispanic male, had general anesthesia, doing just great, but from his abdominal surgery, but he is not responding. That's why we kept him back there so long. Well, the good nurse, of course, did her own assessment. Vital signs absolutely normal. Great. Mr. Martinez, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Martinez. He wouldn't respond. So she waited 15 minutes. She repeated the assessment. It was all fine. Mr. Martinez, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Martinez. Finally, her coworker said, you are driving us nuts. Why don't you try waking him in his native language? So they told her what to say. She repeated it over and over in her mind till she got to the bedside. She reached across the bed rail, put her hands on the man's shoulders, her face 10 inches from his, and shouted, Bésame, Mr. Martinez, bésame. Well, don't know what surprised her the most, Mr. Martinez looking straight up and quite alert, or the hysterical laughter of her coworkers. She said, oh no, what did you have me say to him? They gave her the translation. It was, kiss me, Mr. Martinez, kiss me. Laughter. That's our third mental balance tool. And I think as health caregivers, we forget to laugh. Surely we would never laugh at anyone. But wouldn't you agree? We have to laugh at ourselves and the situations. It is true. Laughter is the best medicine. It does. Boost our immune system, lower our blood pressure, makes us healthier. Kids know this. They laugh 400 times a day. Do you know how many times grown-ups laugh? One study said 11. Somebody told me 4. And you know people who can't meet that quota, don't you? That's why I want you to think about, after today, what makes you laugh? Are there comedians or cartoons or movies that just make you laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh until, as my girlfriend said, till tears run down your pant leg? And are there people that make you laugh? I bet you can picture them. Those people that just bring that joyful, bubbling laughter into your life. And are there other people that just seem to suck that joy right out of you? Well, unless you're married to them, try not to spend so much time with them. And instead, surround yourself with the people and the things that make you laugh. And laugh 400 times a day, like kids, because it's your third mental balance tool. And there's a fourth and final. Besides the slow, deep breathing, besides the positive thinking and visualization, besides the laughter, the fourth is forgiveness. Because we waste a lot of our life. And did you know? We waste our health when we fail to forgive. So starting today, we start to forgive. First of all, ourselves. For any past mistakes or indiscretions, starting today, right now, we forgive ourselves. Because friends, that's who we were then, based on what we knew then. It's not who we have chosen to be today. And starting today, we forgive somebody else. No matter how horrific the offense, and I know some of them are really horrific. But what took me too long to realize is, if you don't forgive somebody, it doesn't hurt them. It only hurts us. So why would we give someone the power who's hurt us so deeply? Why would we give them the power to continue to give us sleepless nights and upset stomachs and headaches and high blood pressure? We have to forgive them whether they deserve it or not. We do. And forgiveness is free. Bernie Siegel not only endorsed Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul, he shared this story of a young man who worked at this facility for years, and it seemed as every day his duty was to lift Miss Sally from the bed to the chair because Miss Sally hadn't walked in 6 years. One day, as he was lifting her, she looked at him and said, "You know, you look like a man of faith. Does God really forgive everything?" He said, "Yes, ma'am, he really does." Later he moved her again. She said, "Are you sure about that? That God always forgives everything?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure." "Well, when I was just a teenager, I stole all the family silver and I sold it so I'd have enough money to get married. I've never told a single soul to this very day. Can he still forgive me this late?" "Absolutely. Just ask." Well, he went on home, and the next night he went into work and was immediately called into his supervisor's office, who said, "What did you tell Miss Sally last night?" She simply asked me if God forgave. I assured her he always does. "Why?" "Because at 3 o'clock this morning, Miss Sally came walking down the hall, put her teeth and her Bible on the nurse's desk, said, 'Won't be needing these anymore,' walked back to her room, lay down, and died." And nearly every time I tell that story, there's a health caregiver in my audience that tells me one just like it. Because, my friends, forgiveness is freeing. So starting today, beside yourself, who are you going to forgive? Now there's that third part of our lives we have to keep in balance, and that is our spiritual selves. Statistics still show that about 93% of Americans believe in God. So I always assume that my audiences reflect that same ratio. So it's to that 93% of you to whom I say, you need to be in touch with your Creator, Supreme Being, Divine, that you believe in every single day. You can't just wait for weekends for that either. Even if it's as little as 15 minutes for quiet prayer or meditation or reflection. But I can hear what you're thinking right now. Yeah, right, Leanne. Where am I supposed to come up with another 15 minutes? You told me I have to stop and breathe several times a day now, and I've got to start taking these short 15-minute walks now, and I got to go to bed earlier, so where am I supposed to come up with another 15 minutes? Well, that was hard for me. Yet I knew it was missing in my life. So I thought a good way to start, and if you need a suggestion, I think it is a good way to start. I bought a little daily reading book. But being the task-oriented nurse that I am, I couldn't sit down and read it. Way too busy for that, of course. So I could read it every day while I dried my hair. So I opened it up on the bathroom counter, and every day with a hairdryer blowing, I read it out loud. And a couple weeks into this, it occurred to me, you know what, Leanne, I think you're supposed to sit down. Shut up. And listen. Just listen to that deep inner voice. Now you can call it intuition, you can call it higher conscience, you can call it Holy Spirit, whatever you believe in. But what I know is that deep little inner voice is the divine guidance in our life, and we cannot hear it in the chaos. Well, I didn't have another 15 minutes to my day, so I had to set my alarm 15 minutes earlier. And for heaven's sakes, you'd have thought I was setting it for 3 a.m. when I moaned and groaned as I hauled myself out of bed. But I soon learned that time is an investment. To this day, if I don't start my days that way, I don't get as much done. I'm not productive. I'm not happy. I'm not the best me. And I believe, friends, we cannot do what we do without a spiritual balance to our lives. But it's hard, isn't it? Give me this physical, mental, spiritual. I still struggle with it. I get in a riding mode and I realize, oh, I'm not exercising enough. So I exercise a bit more, but then I'm not eating quite right. That's when I need to take a step back and take a look at my life. And that's what I'm asking you to do today, to take a step back. Take a look at your life. Are one of the three, the physical, mental, and spiritual, a little out of balance? When you heard that list of symptoms, did you make quite a few checks. Maybe in your quiet time, do a little self-assessment. What do you need to better care for yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually? And then we need to ask. Ask. First of all, of ourselves, giving ourselves permission. And maybe ask family members or co-workers or community or church members, what do you need to better care for your body, mind, and spirit? And then you should be more like a toddler. Have you ever noticed that when the toddler figures out what they need, they ask for it until they get it? I want some juice. I want juice, 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 till somebody gets the kid juice, am I right? Now, as grown-ups, we tend not to do that, and especially those of us who work in healthcare. As a matter of fact, instead we do something more like, I didn't get any juice today. I hardly ever get juice anymore. I know I need a little. We need to ask for our juice. And you need to be laughing now because you have 399 more times to laugh yet today. We need to ask for our juice so we can put our lives into better balance. And then we can bring that balance to the workplace. But would you agree we don't always do that? Not only do we not bring a balance, sometimes we bring an imbalance and then brag about it. Do you know I've worked here 20 years, I never have taken a break. I worked right through lunch again today. Here's the best one for nurses. I didn't even stop to go to the bathroom, like we're proud of this. We have to care for our bodies, minds, and spirit and role model that to everyone we touch. We cannot give from an empty well, and we cannot give the holistic care we're called to give if we are not strong of mind, body, and spirit. And I know there are those days you feel like, yes, but I'm just one little person here. And the need is so great. And I can never seem to get it all done. And I can't take all the pain away. I can't make everybody better. I can't make everybody happy. Some days I can't make anybody happy. And on those days you're wondering, is my little ordinary part worth this? And I'm here to tell you, yes, it is. Because everything you do matters in ways you'll probably never even know about. There was a sign above a burn unit in Vietnam that made that point. An American plastic surgeon set up a clinic to help the kids that were burned and disfigured by the war. And above the doorway he wrote, "It's better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness." And that's what you do every day. You light your single candles. And in doing so, you inspire other people in your department and in your home and in your community to light theirs. And they go on and inspire other people to light theirs. And you set not just your place, you help set the world aglow with your goodness and caring. I think Mother Teresa said it best. She said, I can't do great things. I can only do small things with great love, like you. This nurse worked nights, pediatric floor. Cancer. One night she was tiptoeing from bed to crib. She found the little 7-year-old girl sound asleep, bald as a peach. Her little hand was sticking through the rail. And the good nurse, just instinctively, like nurses do, bent down and took her little hand, whispered a prayer for her, bent over and kissed her bald little head. And she went to tiptoe away when she heard, "Miss Allison, Miss Allison." So she went back and took the child's hand again. And the little girl said, "Miss Allison, when I grow up, I want to be what you are." "Oh," she said, "I know you'll grow up, honey. You're going to make a marvelous nurse someday." "No, I don't want to work in a hospital, and I don't want to be a nurse. It's an angel I want to be." There's no denying it. Nurses and health caregivers, you are angels of mercy. That's why I dedicated Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul and Caregiver's Soul to you. And the dedication reads, "To all nurses and caregivers who perhaps more than any other group on earth truly ease the suffering of the world." So for every hand you've held, every candle you have lit, every life you have touched, I thank you, thank you, thank you. Because while you might think sometimes your part is small and ordinary, you are making an extraordinary difference in this world. Because you, my friends, you are the heroes. And I applaud you Thank you. It's been my joy to spend these few moments with you and offering these tools. If I can help you anymore, and I would love to serve, please email me at the email address below, or my phone number's even there. I want to take care of you while you take care of everyone else. God bless.
Thanks for joining us today for the Work-Life Balance program. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Colleen Marzilli from the University of Texas, Tyler. Next, Dr. Anne-Marie Brooks, a nursing consultant and healthcare consultant. Kim LaMontagne, who is an international speaker, trainer, and author. And finally, Dr. Khadija Tuit, a speaker and psychiatric nurse manager. We all know that you are only as good as you are balanced, and the pandemic has taken its toll on our minds, our bodies, our spirits of healthcare professionals as they navigate the unrest, the uncertainty, and of course, the unknown. Our panel today addresses compassion fatigue, resilience, a mentally healthy workplace, and the art of reinvention. Thanks for being with me today. Today we'll be looking at the concept of the impact of compassion fatigue on healthcare professionals, discussing the role of resilience in surviving and thriving during a pandemic, describing the need for a mentally healthy workplace, and discussing the art of reinvention on oneself and the effect on balance. We'll start with Colleen. Would you please share your insight related to compassion fatigue?
Thank you so much, Sharon. Yes, compassion fatigue is such an important concept for all healthcare professionals. All healthcare professionals are at risk for compassion fatigue because the care that we provide brings distress when we experience emotional or physical pain and suffering from the care that we provide. Compassion fatigue is a very complicated set of symptoms. It's not a disease, and compassion fatigue has, in some cases, been linked to burnout. Compassion fatigue is a broadly defined concept, and we see that healthcare professionals, in whatever capacity that they are operating in, when they are providing authentic self-care, when they are engaging in meaningful, caring experiences for patients of all walks of life, this can create a toll on their emotional well-being in such that the symptoms that they would normally use to cope and support their own well-being during times of trouble, for some reason, they are no longer able to help that healthcare professional manage that daily stress of providing care. When this happens, we see that compassion fatigue does occur, and we often like to think of a way that we can cure compassion fatigue. Can we engage in self-care? Can we engage in rest? Can we engage in wellness opportunities, whether they're physical activity, proper nutrition, taking those ever important mental breaks? Compassion fatigue can be set off in many different cases, and we are seeing that compassion fatigue is exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Compassion fatigue occurs when those self-care opportunities are no longer able to cope, and care professionals have symptoms of isolation. They have feelings where they want to have emotional outbursts. They experience sadness. They experience apathy. A lot of times we'll see exacerbation of chronic conditions or physical ailments. Sometimes when compassion fatigue occurs, we will even see healthcare professionals having recurring nightmares. They may experience past psychological trauma. Compassion fatigue is something that can happen to all healthcare professionals, and it is so important to remember that you are not alone as a healthcare professional when you experience compassion fatigue. Because the nature of what healthcare professionals do on a daily basis implies that we are continually giving of ourselves to others, we are at risk for compassion fatigue. So my hope is that you are aware of the concept of compassion fatigue, and that when you start experiencing symptoms of sadness, physical symptoms, chronic condition flare-ups, that you are able to pause and reflect and give yourself an opportunity to recover and recuperate your own self and your own well-being so that you are able to overcome compassion fatigue. Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks, Colleen. That was a really interesting perspective, especially as it relates to the need to take that pause, to the fact that we're not all alone, and that there are no borders. Everyone is eligible for compassion fatigue. And that leads us to a defense mechanism or a recovery mechanism. Anne-Marie, would you tell us about resilience?
Thank you so much, Sharon and Colleen. Your speaking about never alone is so very important. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity, to work through challenges and overcome obstacles. And for the past 8 months, we've had a new level of challenge where when we thought or heard about the pandemic, we thought it was time limited and there would be easy recovery. Now that it's become chronic, it's a different set of resilient characteristics that are constantly being called on. And so we all have resilience, but that ability to go down deep and to recover takes a lot of energy. Last week, I spent 4 days talking with bedside nurses from a Midwest hospital about how they've coped with the pandemic. And to a person, there was optimism. And so my amazement was my questioning them, what has helped with your resilience? Because as Colleen said, clinician burnout is a reality. And they told me universally, consistently, that the resilience of their leaders, the leaders being visible, accessible, giving them support, communicating, being transparent, has helped them as they've taken care of patients with pandemic. They've seen the risks of what's happening. And so that leads me to think about what each of us should be doing with our resilience toolbox. And I'd like to focus on 3 things. I use a tool called Check Your Temp. I've been using this for a number of years, and I'd just like us to think about it. Temp stands for thoughts, energy, mood, and perspective. Each of us, we can't control the challenges that face us every day, but we can control our reaction. So checking your temp, what are your thoughts? Are they pessimistic, optimistic? What's your level of energy and your emotions? What's your mood and your perspective? Are you going into work not feeling as if you can do what you need to do? So checking your temp, I use it with myself, with others. I used it on the first Zoom wine and cocktail party that we had a couple of months ago, and everybody loved talking about it. The second strategy I want you to think of is the gift of imperfection. Oftentimes we waste energy on trying to be perfect. Never let perfect get in the way of good. That's so very important. And the third is rejoice, renew, recognize, and refresh yourself. Colleen mentioned it in talking about clinician burnout. but it's so very important to sleep, to eat right, to get outside, to take time for yourself. Because you know, as a leader or as a peer, other people are watching your reaction. Resilience is a toolbox. Let's build it. Let's be grateful for what we've got. But we're never alone in resilience. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That's a whole new perspective on Temp. But looking at Temp as a different type of topic, I was thinking temperament. And then when you went into those 4 perspectives, they're amazing, and they're something that we all need to think about. That also is a great segue into what Kim is going to discuss with us today, because you said resilience starts with the leader. Kim, how can we have a mentally healthy workplace?
Thank you so much, and great content so far. And this is a perfect lead-in, because to have a mentally healthy workplace culture, individuals need to feel safe, they need to feel seen, and they need to feel heard. And I recently, in April of this year, participated in a national nurse well-being survey with over 1,200 respondents, and there were RNs and clinical professionals that answered questions for that survey, and many of them have reported that they do not feel safe in the workplace. Over 56% of nurses and clinicians in that survey felt that there's a stigma in the workplace around mental health. And half of those respondents feel very unsafe or neutral coming forward and asking for help. But what the most alarming statistic is that 78% of those individuals who feel unsafe or neutral asking for mental health support in the workplace report that they're likely to leave their current position or specialty. And to dovetail on what Anne-Marie was talking about in terms of Temp, I teach all the time, check your emotions, put them on an emotional scale of 1 to 10, 1 being horrible, 10 being fantastic. And on a daily basis, where are you? Check your number. And if you're at a 4 or 5 or a 6, don't strive to get to a 10, just strive to get to the very next number. And what can you do? And in the workplace, it is really the leader's responsibility to model what a safe workplace culture looks like. It is their responsibility to really bring forward and put tools and programs into place, like peer support network groups, where individuals who are struggling with mental illness, who have made it through to the other side, can be support champions for those other individuals who may be having a hard time right now. Another thing that I actually teach about is knowing your own signs of burnout and of mental illness. You know your signs. So maybe identify 5, 6, 10 signs. Share those outwardly to your peers. Share it with your leader to say, I'm being proactive right now. These are some of the signs you may not notice that I may display that really kind of indicate that I'm having a difficult time. So really understanding from that personal level what your signs are, and then sharing it with other individuals. And what I have found in the work that I do is that the most powerful organizations really make it possible for individuals to feel safe and to feel comfortable coming forward and speaking openly about mental health and well-being in the workplace. Because many of us, including myself, when I was suffering too, I have both the lived experience and the leader experience. But many times I wanted to come forward and say, I'm struggling, but I was afraid of losing my seat at the table. I was afraid of retribution. I was afraid that I might be viewed in a completely different way. But what I've recognized and what I've learned along the way is that I am a person who lives very successfully with mental illness. And once I changed that perception of who I am, that I am a person and I'm living successfully, it's given me the power as a leader, teacher, and a trainer to go back and share my story and be able to give individuals permission to come forward without fear or retribution and speak openly about mental health in the workplace. Safety is incredibly important. And I speak to nurses on a regular basis. And when I ask them to check in on their emotions, many times they are at a 1 or negative. And COVID is absolutely impacting them. And as leaders, it really is our responsibility to provide that culture that is judgment-free, that is safe, that embraces person-centered language, so gets rid of maybe the words alcoholic, junkie, and replaces those with, that's an employee, that's a person who is struggling or living with alcohol use disorder or mental illness. So it's about changing the perception, creating that culture and that bubble of safety, and modeling it from the top level down throughout the entire organization.
Wow, thank you so much, Kim. I found that really fascinating because sometimes we don't really trust and know ourselves. We've always said that nurses have a sixth sense. Maybe it's time to use and apply that sixth sense when it comes to ourselves, recognizing the need, knowing how to get help, and knowing where to get help. But it really is about trust, it's about instinct, and it's about knowing and trusting ourselves first. We all know that we go through cyclical nursing shortages. Who knows what this pandemic will bring? Here to talk to us today about the whole concept of reinventing ourselves is Khadijah. Let's hear from you.
Hi, and thank you, everybody. Perfect segue. I also agree. And thank you, Kim, Colleen, and Anne-Marie, because you all touched on things that are going to be critical to self-reinvention. Resilience, avoiding compassion fatigue, and just knowing who you are and where you stand and how you're feeling and checking in with yourselves. And during this pandemic, I think everyone has had to look at where we are, who we are, and where we are trying to be. And a lot of that requires self-invention. So what does it mean to reinvent oneself? One definition of self-reinvention is changing our old ways and learning new things relevant to our goals. It involves introspecting, realizing who we want to be, understanding more about ourselves, eliminating bad habits, cultivating good habits, and taking actions that can help us evolve into our better versions. It's never too late to recognize a need for change and then to reinvent ourselves to be a better version of who we are. I would like to leave you with my 5 personal keys to self-reinvention. Number 1, you have to believe it to achieve it. Self-reinvention requires the vision and the mindset to see yourself where you want to be, despite where you are. It requires a deep understanding and acceptance of one's journey, strengths, failures, and fears, with an equal desire to continue on and to conquer with courage. It is trusting the process when the end result is unknown or uncertain. Number 2, keep it real. Authenticity matters, and you cannot reinvent yourself if you are not honest about who you are and who you are working to be. There is no peace in pretending, and there is no losses, just lessons learned. There is never any failure in that. Number 3, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Self-reinvention prevents stagnation. It requires adaptability, as one cannot grow if they are not willing to stretch past the point of contentment. Number 4, there is power in positivity. What you tell yourself matters. So tell yourself something good every day. Let negativity slide off like Teflon and let positivity stick like Velcro. There is enough pain in the world. No need to self-inflict anymore. Number 5, plan your path and prepare for pitfalls. The road won't always be easy, so the more you plan, the better prepared you will be for your journey. Lastly, I'd just like to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from the great Harriet Tubman. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember to have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was really an inspirational message. I think that what I took away and liked best about that is the concept of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that has impacted each and every one of us at one time or another. What if the pandemic ended tomorrow? How would that affect your whole philosophy?
If the pandemic ended tomorrow, I still believe that the philosophy that I have of creating an environment of safety in the workplace absolutely still stands. And I will share an example with you of a conference that I spoke at last August of 2019. There were about 100 senior vice presidents in the room from talent development, human resources, nursing, from the Houston area and surrounding areas. And I got up, this was prior to the pandemic, and I got up, I was the first presenter of the day, and I shared my statistics about mental health and well-being in the workplace, the cost of unaddressed mental illness, and then I shared my own personal story of hiding behind a mask many years ago as a high performer while living with alcohol use and mental illness. And at 11 years sober, I proudly step on stages now and share my story. But after I shared my own personal story of living behind a mask, being afraid, being anxious, feeling like an imposter, because yes, outwardly I was soaring, but inwardly I was falling to pieces. Over that 2-day conference, I had 13 senior vice presidents walk up to me and say, Kim, you just spoke directly to me. I saw myself in you, and thank you for stepping forward and being brave enough to say that as a leader, you are suffering. If the pandemic were to end tomorrow, we absolutely 300% still need to focus on creating that culture of safety so that we can allow individuals to speak their truth, to speak openly, to feel safe, and to be able to realize that higher level of engagement when we're able to support our employees and they feel safe, seen, and heard. So I think my topic of creating that culture of safety in the workplace, if the pandemic ended tomorrow, there's a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder that's going to happen or is happening right now, and is absolutely critical that we continue to build those safe workplace cultures.
And that also has a huge impact on the concept of compassion fatigue. We've dealt with compassion fatigue for years. Colleen, how would that impact you and your philosophy related to compassion fatigue if in fact we had a vaccine or if the pandemic were over?
Sharon, that's a great question. And building off of what Kim said, you know, we just have such an opportunity to move forward. We know that healthcare professionals are continually performing beyond what we should expect them to. As caregivers, as healthcare professionals, we go above and beyond to put other people's needs before our own. I always like to think of being on an airplane and they say you must put your oxygen mask on before you help the person next to you. And as healthcare professionals, we're so used to focusing on the person next to us because that's our job, to take care of our patients. But we cannot forget that we have to take care of ourselves, or we end up in a situation where we do have compassion fatigue and we are not able to do our job to the best of our abilities. We may be a high performer and have coping mechanisms, whether they're positive or whether they're maladaptive, like alcoholism, like Kim shared. But when we think of compassion fatigue and we think of the possibility, the very real possibility of there being a vaccine just around the corner, we must, as healthcare professionals, not forget that we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to understand what that vaccine means for us as healthcare professionals to continue to provide care for our patients, and the fear and anxiety that our patients may have about a vaccine. So how can we take care of ourselves, and how can we put ourselves first so that we can do our job to the best of our ability, not experience this very real situation of compassion fatigue, and be an effective caregiver.
So self-care is not selfish. What will it take for healthcare professionals to realize that it is not selfish, that there is a methodology behind put your own mask on first? So Anne-Marie, I turn to you. What if we could all be resilient? What if we really all knew about that temp check and what it really means?
Thank you, Sharon. I think the temp check gives us hope about control, but I would hope if we thought about the pandemic ending tomorrow, we would be so grateful for the lessons learned, and our resilient toolbox would really be all about staying connected with other people. Because one thing that struck me when I was talking to the bedside nurses, so many of them had children, and they were so worried about their children and remote learning, and would they be able to help them while they had to go to work. Some were single moms, some had enough resources to get people to come in, but there was a theme of caring for each other, just as you said, and really role modeling with children and others how important it is to stay connected, never be alone, and making every moment count. But when I said never let perfect get in the way of good, resilience is not bouncing back to perfection. It's bouncing back in a way that you can overcome the challenges, love, learning, discovery, and overcoming obstacles in a team, with each other, with leaders, and really being able to have an attitude of gratitude and being able to do those random acts of kindness. Because that's what we want in life. That workplace, that work balance is all about gratitude and joy.
What if, Khadijah, we stayed in our norm and we did not seek or recognize the need for reinvention? How would that impact us?
Yeah, if we stayed in our norm and didn't seek reinvention, anything that stays doesn't grow. And so therefore we would be stagnant, which would just not be healthy. And I think that one beautiful thing that came out of the pandemic was that as leaders, it really allowed us to even the playing ground, right? No one knew about what was going to happen. Therefore, no one was an expert. And with that, every voice was risen. If you had a great idea, it was heard, right? If you had a thought, please don't leave it in your head. And so everyone was encouraged to speak up and to speak out without judgment, without that feeling that if I say this, I'm going to be viewed as. And so that even playing field really helped to reinvent even what we looked at in healthcare. And as you said, Anne-Marie, people were worried about their children, their families. We had healthcare workers that worked long hours. By the time they were off, the grocery stores were closed, right? We reinvented our process. We made sure we bought the grocery store to the employees. So we opened up a small shop where people could buy groceries in the hospital before they went home, right? Reinvention. We looked at creative ways to help each other. Daycare was a huge issue. So everyone went out looking for resources to help people with daycare. Another thing was many family members were not going home because of fear of reinfecting people that they love. And so we were able to reinvent and connect with other people for campers and places where we can pull the camper right into your yard so that you could safely still be at home with your loved ones without hurting them. And so the beauty of the pandemic was that every voice was heard, every opportunity was cherished, and it really gave us a time to reset and rethink and hold close what we really value the most. So, and resilience, hand in hand. You have to be resilient through this pandemic, because if you're not, you will be fatigued and you will be snappy and you will hurt the people that you care about the most. And as a leader, even when you're feeling it, you want to give a pretense that everything is okay. And I agree with Kim, sometimes the best thing you can do is to be honest. And like I said, keep it real. I'm scared just along with you. What do you think we can do to make things better for all of us? And that's the power of reinvention.
Those were great examples, Khadijah. Unique times call for unique solutions. I'd like each of you to provide a quick answer, just a sentence or two, about what is an example of a unique solution. Why don't we start with you, Colleen?
Thank you, Sharon. So for me, a unique situation for compassion fatigue is just, I've seen multiple hospital systems have embedded counselors, sitting in the break room. Nurses aren't really able to leave the unit, and they have a counselor there to help debrief, because we know that frontline caregivers for COVID-19, and really any healthcare professional during this time, there is such a burden, there is such an emotional distress upon them that just simply having someone that they can talk to in the break room, where they can go and they don't have to do something additional to work, is such a great opportunity. And I love that, because I think it speaks to the importance of mental health and addressing compassion fatigue.
Okay. And Marie, what's a unique solution?
I have to tell you, my experience has been spontaneous celebrations and recognition, whether it's a Zoom call or a birthday that's 6 months out and you want to celebrate it, but staying connected but spontaneous makes a great deal of difference. So nobody has to worry. It's a matter of lifting spirits together.
And again, Khadijah, you led us into that discussion of positivity. Give us one more of your wonderful, unique solutions related to positivity. How do we do that?
Yeah, so one thing that we like to do is to make sure that everyone has a voice. And just like Kim said, you need to have a culture of safety to do that. And also, everyone doesn't like to use their verbal voice, right? People want to give their ideas, but not always the same way. So we have two different forms. We actually use a roundtable discussion. That means everyone's at the table, everyone has a voice, every suggestion gets on there, and then, like everything, we vote. And so it's a collective decision-making process. And we also have a little suggestion box. So if you have thoughts, if you have ideas, all you have to do is put it in the box, and we will pull it out and discuss it also, so we can be the voice for the people who aren't feeling yet like they can speak out loud. But we want to make sure that everyone feels heard. So those are just some things, because I can tell you some of the best ideas come from the people who you don't hear from. So we had to figure out, how can we get these voices on the table as well? Yeah.
I would say, once again, going back to creating that culture of safety where individuals or employees don't feel like they're alone. And one way to do that is to really form a peer support network within your organization of employees who are willing to come forward, share their personal lived experience and how they got through it, so that employees, leaders, know that there's a network of individuals that you can reach out to above and beyond your leaders, who will understand you, who will be able to create that safe container for you to say, I hear you, I see you, I've been there, I support you, there's nothing wrong with you, we can get through this together.
So for each of you, what is one thing that we should keep in mind as we move forward? Colleen, will you start?
Absolutely, Sharon. So I think one thing that we absolutely have to keep in mind is that, because of the nature of healthcare professionals, and because we are constantly giving of our time, giving of who we are as a person, we have got to remember that breaks are something that we have got to give ourselves. We have got to allow ourselves permission to rest, or we run this so dangerous race of engaging in compassion fatigue.
I want to build on what Colleen said, because that is a high level of self-awareness, to give one permission to take a break. I want to build on that, and it's important for self-awareness. It's extremely important for situational awareness, to know yourself and how you'll react. But I want to say, nurses have been the most trusted profession recognized in Gallup for 18 years. That trust is a gift and a privilege. but that trust is built on our own trust of self. So that's why self-care and self-awareness and situational awareness are so very important. Be kind to yourself first, and you'll be able to be kind and excellent with others.
So it really is about self-talk. It's what we're telling ourselves. It's the messages that we're giving internally. Because if we don't open up and hear those messages, and we're not open to ourselves and what our mind and our body are telling us, we can't do a thing. Kim?
So that's a great question, and I would love to expand on taking a break. And I was just teaching this to a group of nurses over the weekend, that to practice self-care does not mean you have to go out and spend a lot of money on self-care or an entire day or even an afternoon. Just giving yourself even just a 5-minute break, permission to walk away. Schedule it in your calendar. And when that comes up on your calendar, resist the temptation to say, I don't have time for that. It's on your calendar for a reason.
Tisha, why don't you leave us with a final thought?
So for a final thought, I think I'd like to say to remember your why. You know, as healthcare providers, as healthcare leaders, we all got into this field for a reason. And a lot of times in the chaos and craziness of everything that's happening, we're in the moment and we're forgetting our why. And sometimes just tapping into that helps you to refocus on why you're here, what you're doing. And as a leader, helping other people to even identify their why. Because sometimes they absolutely just don't know. There's a feeling, there's a pull, there's a desire, but each person individually and introspectively has their own why. You know, our journey proves that regardless how rough the path is, we are able to navigate obstacles, and we can turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones to rise above and overcome any obstacle.
Great. What a wonderful ending. I think that we've shared some amazing perspectives today. Again, unique times call for unique solutions. Each of you has raised awareness and provided solutions that I think will have a tremendous impact on our viewers. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hey, everybody. Now we're going to talk about how to communicate effectively with the consideration of employee engagement in the workplace. You know, there are certain things that really trip us up, like incivility or actual violence or that prejudice thing that keeps rearing its ugly head. And we're going to talk about that a lot right here in this panel. I want to tell you that this panel today is brought to you thanks to our friends at R3 Results, one of our sponsors in our Innovation Town. You can go visit their little house, their little business house. And the president and CEO of R3 Results is G.A. Bartik, who is happy to be right. And the way I'm looking anyway, he's right down there. Thank you, G.A. He is an author and an international speaker and facilitator. And he usually concentrates, up until lately, I guess, on employee engagement. Yes, and how to make a better workplace culture. So,
absolutely, Candy. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Glad to be and honored to be here with you, Helen and Renee, too.
Oh, thank you. All right. And then we have Renee Thompson, who is also down on the bottom row, if you're looking like I am, who helps cultivate professional workforces by addressing incivility and bullying. Yes. And I will just tell everybody, I'm going to brag a little bit about you here. As a National Speakers Association friend of mine, she's one of only 26 nurses worldwide who holds a designation of certified speaking professional. It's not easily won. And so, Renee, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Candy. I'm really honored to be here with your esteemed other panelists.
And you are welcome. Dr. Helen Holton, last but not least here, another NSA friend. Yes, Helen is founder and chief thought leader of Dr. Helen Holton and Associates, and she has degrees in urban ministry and theology. And she has dealt with all kinds of collaboratives around inclusion, diversity, resilience, all sorts of those kinds of issues. And aside from that, she has so many certifications I can't even tell you, including the one that I recognized right away, which is the Gallup Strength Leader. She's a coach and a trainer for that, but she does a lot of work with coaching and mentoring. So thank you so much, Helen, for being with us here today.
Candy, thank you so much for the invitation. You know, I just love you and Sharon both to pieces, and I'm just ecstatic to be here because I think the times we're living in really call for us to take a look at these things that will keep us going and keep us focused on what it is we want out of life.
I mean, out of all the panels, this panel right here seems to be the most timeliest of what's going on in our world right now.
Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you would think with COVID-19 raging that we would give an extra measure of patience and grace to all of our friends. And, well, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Start with you. Tell us how you got started on this topic of hostility and incivility. And what do healthcare leaders need to know about the importance of this issue?
Well, it's interesting. I've been a nurse for almost 30 years, and I have done pretty much everything you can do as a nurse, from bedside nursing, education, home care. I worked for a managed care company. I was a frontline leader. I was in a corporate role. You know, it didn't matter what organization I worked for, what role I had. There were always a group of other nurses and some other roles that I swear made it their mission to make my life difficult. And I didn't understand it because I thought, and wouldn't you all agree, working in healthcare is difficult enough without worrying about your coworkers, like who you're working with that shift. And I decided about 10 years ago, I took a leap of faith, quit a really great job to start my own company because I just said, you know what, enough is enough. When we ignore bad behavior in healthcare, bad things happen to employees and patients. And we need to do a better job addressing disruptive behaviors.
That is.
I just read a stat that over 30% of all nurses are physically abused each year. And I think 54% are threatened. And that's not just by patients, but by patients and also other associates and employees.
Yeah, GA, and that's underreported. That is underreported. And that's just physical violence. But what about the verbal and the threatening and the incivility? Because that's the problem. When you've got somebody who's being bullied or they're actually on the receiving end of some type of extreme physical violence, that is almost easier to address because you see it, you could take action, but it's all of that other incivility, the mocking, the condescension, the being afraid, the retaliation that we have in healthcare right now that really affects. And I know that you and I both are culture, like we understand the importance of culture and culture by design, and it affects the culture so much.
I love where this is going. You know, as a Gallup certified strengths coach and trainer, I work with executives, entrepreneurs, and emerging leaders, helping them to be the best that they can be based on who they are by nature and nurture. And I find that when you take that and you juxtapose it against microaggressive behaviors that we are confronting in the workplace today in ways like never before, as well as the narrative of you can't turn on your TV or your radio without hearing the divisiveness in the dialogue that's happening in our world today. So doing work about helping people to become their best, because Gallup has done the research that says when you are actively engaged in being the best that you can be, you're more likely to report having a 300% greater fulfillment in life.
Mhm.
300%.
Wow.
Just imagine that, 3 times more than the average person. And what that relates to in terms of employee engagement is that you're 6 times more likely to be actively engaged in the work that you do.
Mhm.
GA, as a businessman, you've got to, what does that mean if you knew that folks showed up to work 6 times more engaged in the work that they do because they're valued for what
Mhm.
they bring that's good and right and happening for them?
Oh, that's the things that could happen and the way that our organization could change and the productivity and just the outcomes for our clients and ourselves would dramatically improve.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I have to ask you this question because in researching your business model, you've concentrated on all kinds of other businesses. And I know that first responders are a part of what you work with R3 Results. Tell us what happened to change the focus of your business, and what are you doing in terms of helping healthcare leaders?
So when you talk about the pivot I made, so I started off as a sales and leadership consulting organization and worked with some of the biggest companies from Google and YouTube and Hotels.com, Expedia, Time Warner. And we started seeing this, what we've been talking about, these little, you mentioned, I wrote it down here, the microaggressive behaviors, and started seeing that employees are not equipped with the tools to be
Nope.
able to de-escalate a potentially verbal confrontation. And so somebody gets angry, gets upset. There's tools and skills that you need to have
Mhm.
that you can quickly diffuse that. And that's what we started concentrating on and seeing what can we do to help somebody have the skills they have, the tools, so they can, what we call, create verbal mastery. Verbal knowledge is kind of knowing what to do. So we have a whole program. It's video based, it's live based. And you walk out of like any training program that works on communication, you walk out with what we call verbal knowledge. Okay, I know what to say, but how do you move from verbal
Right.
knowledge to verbal skill? We can actually say it to verbal mastery. We can say the right thing at the right time in those critical moments where you are under extreme pressure, so that you can handle a situation that you're not used to being in every single day. And that's what our program, and we got a patent on the process itself to help people have the tools and skills. And what we find is when they feel that the company's investing in them in something like this, when it comes to verbally diffusing violent confrontations, that again, it helps in every aspect. It helps in their confidence, it helps in their employee satisfaction. So that's really what we saw that and said, hey, we got to get out there. And the stuff we saw just wasn't adequate to get people the skills they need so they can internalize it, so they can then react on it.
You know, I love that. I love that because it goes back to what does it take? And every study will show, this is why I do work around inclusion and equity and diversity and respect. You know, that when you figure out that we all bring biases with us into an environment, into a culture. And so it goes back to, from a business perspective, what's your plan? What's your culture that you are fostering, that you're looking to build? That speaks so much to the health of your organization. And I love that this is, this whole lead for excellence is emanated out of nurses, because for years I've said, in the African American community, just given the inequities that we face as a people, Black people, is that health is the greatest wealth that we have. And if we don't take care of our health, it's not just our physical health, it's our emotional health, it's our psychological health, it's our financial health, it's, all of that rolled into one. And then when you find yourself in difficult times, when your back is up against the wall, what gets you through? The mastery, those skills that you have attained, that you're attaining them, not necessarily when you need to call them out, when your back is up against the wall, but you're building them, developing them, that when a pandemic occurs, you find that things aren't as bad as you see other people going through, because you have learned new skills and a mastery that you can bring to bear on that to get you through. So I love it.
Well, and I'd love to really help round this conversation out. An excellent point, both of you, and I can reinforce and validate this, that especially when it comes to frontline leaders in healthcare and knowing the negative impact, if we ignore disruptive behaviors, that negative impact on patients and their employees. Leaders don't know what to say to people. They don't know how to tell their most clinically competent nurse that she's toxic, that she's got people coming into her office crying, and that she's lost people because of her. Like, nobody's teaching leaders how to do this. And I so appreciate, GA, when you said you there's the verbal knowledge, but it's the skill and the mastery, because we're big on scripting. Because I always say these leaders, they need to know, what do I say to this person? So we have to give them the words, okay? You have to let them practice, because, I find, and I'm sure you all see this, we're so uncomfortable confronting people. So we do what's comfortable. We do nothing. We don't say anything. And then when we ignore disruptive behaviors, they just escalate. And giving them the tools that they need, the practical tools that the leaders need. But then also, if I'm working at 2:00 in the morning as a frontline nurse, and I'm working with a coworker who I'm afraid of, and I need help from that person, what do I say to that person? And giving them the tools too. So it's kind of like, top down, bottom up, and everything in approach. You have to provide these skills for everyone working in healthcare, because it's not any one of us, it's all of us.
Well, it's interesting, Renee, because it's not just in healthcare.
No.
It's about leadership.
Sure.
And they say, what's the saying? Leaders are born and not made. But, if leadership is in you, it also has to be developed.
Yes.
And this is where it comes in, that you give them the tools to, number one, have the confidence within themselves, and teach them how to prepare. I'm an ordained minister, and, there's a saying, with new levels come new devils, or how, the higher up the ladder you move, the more challenges and naysayers are going to come your way and hurl all those things to knock you back down, however you choose to see it. You've got to learn how to build that reservoir of reserve, so that when the battles come, you don't flake out and feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do? No, you may immediately react and then stop and pause and know that you can get through this, because you have tools in your toolbox. They're going to see you through and help you.
I can say one thing. If I could look at all the business owners, all the healthcare owners, the one thing that is, as we are out there marketing our program, when we're talking to these business owners or people in the decision-making process, they're like, oh, and the stats are overwhelming that this is happening in just about every company out there.
Yep.
Like, oh, that's not GA. I'm sure that's happening. That's not happening in my organization. And yes, it is. And so people are afraid to talk about it.
Yep.
And so please, let's have the conversation. You need it, your team needs it too.
Yes. But what's important, we're talking about leadership and leaders, that it's important that we train leaders and make leaders aware. You don't ask the doctor if the medicine is working, you ask the patient. And so don't walk in with a prescription for a problem that they don't have. Right. And that's where coaching comes into play. I love coaching, because I've managed people. I'm like, no, I'm done managing people. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to coach people, because I don't know what the best answers are for you. But you know what? I'm going to stand in that space with you to give you that safe place to try things out, throw them up against the wall, see what lands, whatever it is you need to do, and help you develop the best of who you are. This world has spent billions of dollars on fixing what's wrong with people, over focusing on what's really right and good with people. Just imagine if we really took and spent the time to develop people in what they're naturally good at, the things that you're born at. And therein lies a lot of the missed opportunities that we find in leaders who do not have the courage or confidence within themselves to go forward.
Courage.
So true. GA, I have also been a nurse in the hospital, and I noticed in the last few years before I retired in bedside nursing and went strictly academic and speaking, that there was a change, as Helen has mentioned, in our culture where the violence has been brought into the hospital, and it's not just the acute care centers, it's the long-term centers too. You have gangs of people, and it's not always just a gang of people. Sometimes it's a family that's having, oh my goodness, the kind of incivility that happens, and healthcare workers get pulled into it, or unfortunately are the target of it. Tell us what your research says about that.
There's all kinds of research. But again, it's not just the associates working or the healthcare workers working on it. It's really going into the families, the patients. Think about the stress they're under. And I said, earlier I mentioned, 54% of all nurses are threatened and feel threatened. So it's really, how do these nurses, they know the medicine well, but it's that communication skills. It's the doctors. They've gone through years of schooling, but do they have the bedside manners to sit there and be able to talk to a family and de-escalate that conversation and have the skills to do that effectively? And when we teach people how to do this, again, it helps in every aspect of their lives. Because again, sometimes they're sitting there and having to referee between two family members who are going at it too.
I have to bring into this conversation, because as I'm listening, I do work around cultural competency, intercultural competency. And I think culture and cultural intelligence goes a long way, because if you look at a situation and you decide, we all live with conscious and unconscious biases, but we don't always recognize that we live with these. And so it's important for leaders to understand what's in my blind side that I don't see. How is it that I am treating people different? I have a treatment different based upon the similarities or differences between us that I'm not consciously aware of. I often think that I am inclusive, when in actuality, I may not be. I may be part of the problem that's causing performance not to be where it can be, simply because the lens through which I'm looking is flawed, because I'm only seeing it my way without looking around to see how do people different from me perceive this same situation? And am I responding honestly and fairly, regardless of what I perceive about someone that's different from me?
In our last couple of minutes, I'm going to ask each one of you, now that we've talked a little bit about the overview of the systemic problem, give us some tips. Renee, let me start with you. What is the takeaway that you can give to an individual leader or a person who aspires to be a leader that might be listening, to say, what can you do to help this problem of bullying and incivility on your list?
Sure. Well, it starts with having the mindset, and this is a phrase that I say over and over and over again, and that is, the way we treat each other is just as important as the care that we provide, okay? And we have to stop justifying somebody's disruptive behaviors just because they're so good at what they do. And the first step is just to raise awareness of disruptive behaviors, because you can't expect people to adapt their behavior if they're not even aware their behavior needs to be adapted. Very similar to what you said, Helen. Like it's raising self-awareness, and to just start confronting disruptive behaviors in the way that it can be as simple as just naming this behavior. You're yelling at me. I just saw you roll your eyes at me. You just turned away. You're giving, why are you ignoring me? Just naming the behaviors. But we have to stop justifying bad behavior, especially in healthcare.
That's helpful. Thank you. Naming the behavior. I'm going to remind that to my...
Just name it.
Yeah. and GA, what is one thing that you can give our listeners to help on their list of what to do?
So, there's a large list of things you can do when you are in a potentially violent situation, when I first learned some of these steps in the process, the first thing that was counterintuitive to me, when somebody's coming at you, they're angry, your natural tendency is to kind of fall back and, but what you need to do is you need to meet them where they're at with a similar force, not anger, but in a similar energy as they're coming after you. And when you do that, you got to practice that. And we've seen it over and over again. When people do that, we have thousands of people have talked about it and said, that's the first step, it stops them almost in their tracks.
Really?
They're looking for you to react and respond and to cower. And when you don't, so it's meeting them with equal energy that they're coming after you with. And again, it comes down to the dollars and cents of this too. We're talking about, I think, average healthcare, I think their turnover is almost 18%. And a big part of this is the culture that we're talking about here. And how do you help that? It's costing hospitals, millions of dollars every single year, by not addressing those small situations that happen each and every day.
Exactly. That's why I remember when I was living in LA, my husband did not want me to even work at certain hospitals because they were known as violent places. And that's scary. That's scary. Most of us don't have those kinds of skills. So it's good to know that these programs that you all have them. Helen, let's round it out and give us your tips.
I'm going to say, to thine own self be true, and to practice active listening. We often, when someone is coming at us or confronting us from a position of anger, angst, whatever, we stop listening. We hear, but we aren't listening. And so there is an art to actively listening, asking questions to diffuse. There are ways that when you are fully present, not focused on, and it's like there are 3 different levels of listening. You want to go beyond level 1, because level 1 is that reactive listening that you hear and you immediately go to whatever's triggering within you in the context of who you are. That in active listening, you want to go to a slightly deeper level of listening where you're not focused on what are you going to say the minute the person who's talking stops talking, because you usually only get the first few words they've said. Active listening is really listening. And before you open your mouth to say anything, kind of process, what have I heard? And when you go from that perspective to really value the input you've just received over your next move, it's just amazing what kind of shift can occur.
Thank you. So what I hear you guys saying is that aside from the relationship building, which is obviously going to be key to good harmony in the workplace, when we feel incivility or hear it, we need to name it. We need to meet it with, and not be the rabbit, as they say, and run away, and listen really hard so that we can take the next step and hopefully diffuse the situation. Well, I wish that we had a lot more time to discuss this. And I know that a lot of our listeners are going to want to get together with you. All 3 of you are going to be in our roundtable. They're going to want to talk to you more about this. Thank you again so much, all of you, for making yourself available today and during our summit. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Hi, this is Sharon Weinstein from Lead for Excellence. What a great day it is to talk about innovation. For those of us within the healthcare space, innovation is a constant. From the days when we jerry-rig products ourselves to the days in which we actually have real innovative products that are transforming practice and safety and outcomes. The pandemic has had a huge impact on healthcare product and service fulfillment. And the crisis is a reminder that it is during times of disruption, such as these, that some of the greatest innovations happen. In this session, we'll address innovating during a pandemic, educating during a pandemic, and the clinical side, vascular access management. Assess, analyze, and innovate. Prioritizing innovation today is the key to unlocking post-crisis growth. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended nearly every aspect of our life. From the personal, how people live and work, to the professional, how companies interact with their clients, with their services, and certainly how supply chains deliver those products. Our presenters today represent the best of innovation for products and service. Allow me to introduce Lance Bailey, founder and managing director of Healthy Simulation, Amy Copperthwaite, founder and CEO of Avkin, and Judy or Judith Lajoie, who is the chief nurse for medical solutions and outcomes for Becton Dickinson. Let's start with you, Lance. Please share your perspective.
Yeah, so what we're seeing through healthysimulation.com right now with regards to our global audiences who are specifically interested in healthcare simulation and the latest technologies for education, training, and patient safety performance improvements is just a real demand and a need for remote and distance-based learning opportunities for obvious reasons, right? Clinical rotations have been shut down, campus classrooms have been canceled. And so even the laggards when it comes to the technology adoption scale have been forced to deal with the fact that we can't meet in person to provide for these clinical hours as much as we have in the past, right? So it's forced their hand. They finally have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide when it comes to new technologies. And so, we've seen a massive increase in terms of obviously COVID-19 related resources, in terms of specialized training. We just saw a new, for example, report about a new VR PPE simulator that's taken off. So a lot of technology specific to that, and then also remote distance-based telesimulation, and is a buzzword that has really been seen a lot more happening out there around the world in terms of this particular community. So in that sense, we've seen, I think, a lot of these kind of requirements for enabling things to happen through a network and a system for obvious reasons, right? We have learners who are stuck at home. We've also seen task trainers that have been skills-based and can be literally mailed to groups, or for helping to deal with scheduling when it comes to individual sim labs, and then scheduling learners so that they can come in one at a time to engage with a process and a learning process where the hands-on skills-based portion of it must be assessed or tested in some other way. So those are the major things that we're seeing.
Okay, that's interesting, because when I think of sim, I think of the days in which we used to practice on one another. The sim models were not really models. We think back to Annie, are you okay? Annie, are you okay? And I remember my colleagues in the former Soviet Union changed their name and called them Misha and Masha for the male and the female versions of those mannequins. But we certainly have come a long way. And really, sim has become a really important part of our lives. Amy, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I would definitely say I echo what Lance was saying about the adoption curve, but really as clinicals began to shut down, and as we really started to have to innovate as to how we were going to be providing proper education for our nursing students, what I began to start thinking about is these students are going to graduate and not really have that hands-on experience that they would have gotten through their clinical performance or in a simulation setting. So our focus was really on helping hospital systems with onboarding these new graduates, whether it's nurses, respiratory therapists, physicians that really haven't had as much clinical learning practice. Our focus was really on how can we help them make sure that patients are safe. So by focusing on improving patient safety outcomes through simulation learning, that really informed what we did through COVID to help our readership, our customer base. And in kind of what Lance was talking about earlier with the tele-simulation experiences, converting all of our simulation experiences, or as many as possible that didn't include a lot of psychomotor skills, to the telehealth simulation experience by training SPs, which is something that we do all the time. But really then by training those SPs, they can then become the patients in a telehealth simulation experience, so that the students are at least learning in the cognitive and affective domains.
I like that. That certainly has taken us away from see one, do one, teach one.
Absolutely.
Which is the medical school model. We really are moving forward. So interestingly, the COVID-19 pandemic is already inspiring innovation. Obviously, from what you both said, at companies as they adapt to new ways to operate and to serve consumers. And innovation can take many forms. We know that it can be as big as the development of new products and services, or as small as a pivot in marketing strategy. I'd like you to pick up on that, Judy, and tell us what your perspective is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as an industry partner, we're always striving to understand pain points. We're always striving to understand what are people having trouble with, right? I think we saw through COVID-19 how nurses were at their innovative best. We saw them figuring out how to use securement devices that should be on an arm to use on a door frame to get tubing off the floor, right? To really try to make sure that those lines stayed clean. I think that when it's safe to do so, we need to hit the pause button and we need to go and take a really good deep dive look into everything that happened and go back and figure out what are we missing the mark on? What do we need to help develop and innovate on that can really help drive excellent outcomes, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to provide healthcare workers whatever they need to give care safe and efficiently so that they still have that excellent outcome, but also want to help a hospital not break the bank doing that, right? So if we think about the triple aim, how do we continue on being a partner, making sure that we're able to provide goods and services and solutions, right? So not just here, use this widget because this widget is great. It's let's understand why your hospital needs this widget, right? If you're not meeting a standard or guideline rooted in evidence-based practice, to kind of go back to make sure that we're always a partner, right? So it's not just being, hey, I have to go buy this item from that guy. I really want to be a true partner with healthcare to really drive innovation and to drive the continuation of evidence-based practice.
Right, I like that because we are in fact all partners. We are more than ever before all in this together. Amy, I have a question for you. You witnessed students struggling with the human element. Students practice procedures on plastic models, but their education never really included the challenges of communicating with a live human patient and that patient experience during their greatest time of need. What do you see as the future? Where do you see this going?
As far as the communication pieces of this?
Yes.
Yeah, so I really, again, to think about where we are generationally, the new graduates or those that are the rising workforce grew up with a phone in their hands. They walk down the road, you know, looking at their iPhone, and they're actually teaching courses now about facial expressions and how to interpret what those facial expressions mean so that they can understand what a person or a patient is responding to. So as far as the future, I really see the importance and the need for this generation of learners to be able to understand how to communicate face-to-face so that as they're applying what they're learning in their didactic education or in their clinical learning, they're not stressed just even to walk into the room and talk to someone. So that's really where I see as far as the future or the needs and really where we're filling that need is so important and so valuable, both in the academic arena as well as in, you know, the onboarding or the new healthcare sector.
I think that that's really important because those of us who have exposure to young people in the teenage space realize that having a conversation is sitting next to one another, texting from one phone to another phone. Yeah. There is no pick up the phone and talk to anyone. Communication doesn't happen in that way. So I think that it has changed so dramatically that some of the moves that you're taking are really very critical. I have a colleague who indicated that within their healthcare system, they had been hacked and there were no electronic records within any of the 11 or 13 system hospitals. What that posed was a problem for those who were under age 35 who had never seen a paper record. They had no idea what to do. They had no idea what to enter. Yeah. They didn't really understand what age they were in. Lance, let me switch gears and take it to you. Tell me about your digital media background and how that influenced your work with SIM.
Absolutely. So, you know, I went to film school first and foremost, UC Santa Cruz for film and digital media production, right? And then I went down and I worked in Hollywood for a bunch of years. I think I did everything but hair and makeup in terms of production. And so when I got a little tired of Hollywood, I went back to school and became an EMT and a firefighter and learned about simulation. And I mean, it had a direct impact in terms of my ability to understand how simulation worked, where we were basically creating little scenes, right? We had a script or a scenario. We had our standardized patients, our lead actors. We had our confederates as our background actors. We had, you know, sound and music coming in with the overhead audio cues. We had hair and makeup for moulage. So there's a lot of similarities between filmmaking, you know, a mix of documentary and narrative here in this situation, where we documentary and we don't know what we're going to capture. And so we have to try to get things from a lot of different angles and think about them in terms of creating a space for this, a safe space for this dialogue to take place with the interview subjects, where they're willing to talk about themselves and be analyzed and reviewed and kind of, you know, put inside of a box in a sense. And then also a narrative where we're trying to control some of the discussions or the learning objectives that are taking place. And so, you know, I think that has really helped me to kind of understand and to share how we can create more realistic simulation experiences. You know, Amy and AVCAN, they're doing that with regards to adding levels of realism to standardized patients in terms of what you can do, right? So I think it's everything that we can do to add more of those types of steps to create that realistic experience. And then also it's really helped and supported my my work with healthysimulation.com in terms of media production and understanding, you know, how to create bite-sized and useful pieces of information. I think that documentary filmmaking also kind of led itself towards that, not only with our YouTube videos, which have been watched over 2 million times, but also just with regards to presenting that material in a way that can be understood quickly about what's being conveyed here. You know, because we also obviously know that healthcare providers are very busy. They have a lot to deal with. And so we want to try to pack as much important information as possible into an article for them and get straight to the point. What do they need to take away from what we're trying to educate them so they can move their simulation program further faster?
That's interesting, because I saw that you had a viral campaign in 2017 that went truly viral with millions of hits, and it was about preterm simulator Paul. So that was in 2017 and very innovative for the time. How was the response during COVID? Is it as strong? And truly, it's clear to me that your media background really adds incredible value.
Yeah, well, it's you know, I think it's what's fascinating about the simulation community and the industry right now is there's so few professional educational degree programs out there. There's a few master's degree, I think 1 or 2 PhD programs. I know there's some associates, but I mean, we're talking, I can count them all maybe on both hands, right? And so in that sense, we're all kind of sidestepping into the industry from other disciplines. Now, obviously, a lot of us are coming from healthcare, right? We're just kind of expanding our educational or kind of clinical roles into these new technology domains. But you know, through SimGhost and Healthy Sim and other groups out there, we're seeing that there's also just kind of pulling from other industry verticals, right? I came from audio, video, digital media technologies, while the person next to me at a SimGhost event could have 20 years of paramilitary experience, and the person next to us have 20 years of IT experience. And so I think we all have to try to find ways of coming together to share our backgrounds and our information. That's again going to take us further and faster, because now we can all throw our 2 cents into the hat, walk away with $1 each, you know, in terms of those knowledge opportunities. So I think, you know, seeking out, especially, I mean, it's difficult during COVID, obviously, to meet face to face and go to our sim lab, but this is normally how the learning process has taken place for those that are new to the community and to the industry.
Okay, let's switch gears for a minute. Judy, I want to talk to you for a moment. Vascular access is now universal, and hospitalized patients need infusion technology more than ever before. So do non-hospitalized patients, because let's face it, they won't let people into hospitals unless there's a real need. Does predictive analysis play a role in terms of access management, and what have you found in terms of the impact?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I just want to first acknowledge everybody on the front line, right? Especially those on vascular access teams, whether they're inpatient or outpatient, because I think these people, you know, these patients were the sickest of the sick. And it really took skill in order to access them correctly and efficiently, and hopefully in a way that sustained them for their entire course of treatment. And I think it really calls out the need for specialized therapy, right? To have specialists in this realm so that we can, I think as we see the population change and we know how sick the population is, we know that that comes with a level of difficult access. And I think it's unfair to expect everybody in a hospital to be able, or in an outpatient situation as well, to be able to access them appropriately. I think that's where predictive analytics comes into it. We need that data to tell us who needs to be identified as difficult access. And I think when we arm people with them, with that information, it's not playing roulette and hoping for a great outcome, right? We can be very focused and direct to pick the right device for the right patient with this nirvana, if you will, of one patient, one stick, one encounter.
Interesting. So with a focus on PPE and supply chain, has this challenged you at BD to do more with less, to create more and to deliver more quickly?
So I think what it's challenged us to do is to, sometimes when you're a really, really big organization, you work slow because there's a lot of different channels for things to go through. I think COVID-19 has helped us break out of that shell. I think it's helped us put our foot on the gas and not take it off until we've reached our common goal. I think understanding the limitations that we see in inpatient and outpatient has made us change and focus. How do we deliver education differently? You know, we can't get in, I think Lance said it before, we're closed out, right? We can't get into facilities. How do we get the information that clinicians need? Maybe a clinician walks into a unit they're not familiar with or an environment they're not familiar with. How do we help them understand products that they've never touched before without us being formally in front of them? So we've been able to flex and stand up different training and education modalities to meet that need. So it's been, so, you know, kudos to our senior management who basically said, do whatever you need to do to help customers who help patients. And that has been incredibly rewarding work to do because we finally could go at 100 miles an hour and not stop until we got to the destination.
Exactly. But let me ask a question of each of you. What if the new normal, and we've pretty much adjusted to what's happening now? I've heard some of my colleagues say that this new normal or next normal will proceed for perhaps the next couple of years. What if the new normal becomes the next normal? How will we adjust?
Right. Well, I'll go first on that one. Just, you know, I think that this is a catalyst opportunity for a lot of healthcare organizations. So on healthysimulation.com, we recently launched a webinar series ourselves, just specifically with regards to, you know, the types of content that we discussed there, and had a great webinar with Dr. Kelly Bryant, who's the executive director of the simulation program out of Columbia University School of Nursing. And they've shared with us about all the new technologies just that they brought into the program just in the last 6 months. And it was incredible that they were able to pivot their program that quickly with all of these new technologies. And the exciting thing was that she said to our audience that, you know, some of those things are going to stay even after COVID, right? They're that good and they're just more effective and more efficient. So, you know, the adage, when a door closes, a window opens. I think really this is an opportune time. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to get past those laggards who, you know, I mean, we're talking early majority, late majority laggards, all of them from the phase that we see ourselves in terms of the simulation space and the innovation space. We're early adopters, we're innovators, right? We're all at different levels of that scale, but here we are with this unique golden opportunity to really increase the number of technologies and methodologies that are being utilized here now in a way that we've never had the opportunity to before. And I think what's really important about what we're doing right now is to keep track of the data as much as possible, right? See and learn how these new technologies are impacting ROI for your programs in the short term, because once COVID is kind of dealt with and over, and yes, that's probably going to take, you know, Bill Gates and Microsoft are saying it's going to be end of 2021 before this is handled in developed countries, end of 22 at the earliest for undeveloped countries. And so we've got a long runway here still where we're going to be dealing with this. And so keeping track of how these new technologies are impacting programs, I think, are going to be important, because at some point the administrators are going to come knocking and they're going to say, okay, that's all over. We'd like to cut this, this, and this. You know, let's get back to what we were doing before. Well, wait a minute. These two systems over here, yeah, maybe that one, but these two have increased our efficiency tenfold, and here's the data to prove it, right? So I think just making sure to keep track of what we're doing and what we're using and how that can have a big impact for our programs as in the long run. I think that's a key takeaway from the current situation we find ourselves in.
I think that's true because history has shown that crises drives innovation. So when you talk about, yes, it's increased our productivity, it's probably also enhanced our outcomes.
Right.
And
right, for sure.
prioritizing innovation today is the key to unlocking our post-crisis growth. So Amy, do you want to touch on that? What if new becomes next?
Yeah, so I actually was thinking, touching on what Lance said about the idea of the new normal or the next normal and how simulation impacts that. To think about the fact that it's not just about COVID, it's also about diversity and inclusion. It's also about mental health. There is so much work that needs to be done, and not just mental health from the patient's perspective, but also from the resiliency of our frontline providers, as Judy was talking about earlier. I think we really need to be able to focus on how do we make sure that we are addressing these topics and these issues with providers before they get faced with it at the bedside, talking about, social injustice, talking about potentially some, diversity issues that are a difficult way to, how do you open up that conversation and have that conversation with someone that's different than you? How do you also talk about care? Because we know that when there are crises or when there is a healthcare crisis, typically culture and personal beliefs come out much stronger. Mental health is an ever-present issue. It was a rising issue and it's been out there, but it's even more prevalent now than it was before. How do we help to work with people how do we identify people that are at risk? How do we make sure that we are communicating that with them in a way that's right? And I think that also is such a perfect opportunity for the telehealth simulation experiences, or again, the inclusion of these live participants that are trained to be the simulated patients and family members for these experiences. It really adds to a richness that we wouldn't have tried it before, probably in a telehealth virtual environment, but we're trying it now and we are seeing very big impacts. And I think Judy was also talking about the data, but looking at that data, I think Lance was this too, but we are doing evaluations on this all the time to make sure that it's meeting the learner's needs, and making sure that they're able to grow so that they are resilient when they get out there into the workforce, and so that they are able to identify people that are at risk and they are comfortable taking care of diverse populations of people in a way where these people are feeling that they are being cared for properly.
Judy, would you address new and next?
Yeah, so I was thinking both as Lance and Amy were talking about, and I think we need to take all of our learnings that we encountered. We have to go from reactive to proactive, right? So how do we take everything that we learned and switch it a little bit and now be proactive? Because I think that's where the data comes into it, right? So we need to collect as much data as possible, because what we learn from the data helps us to be proactive and takes us out of this constant reactive state. When we're in a reactive state, we're doing what we need to do to just get it done, right? But when we think about what can the data drive, right? The data should drive the next evidence-based practice. And how do we take that data and how do we learn? And like I said before, when it's safe to do so, how do we hit that pause button to really take that deep dive to assimilate everything together to then put us on a course of proactivity instead of being this constant reactive? Because reactive takes a long time. Reactive has a lot of cracks. Reactive can let a lot of things fall through those cracks. So how do we switch it? How do we, kind of flip the switch, if you will, and really start to use the data to our advantage to make sure that we're proactive?
Great. I'm going to, at this point, switch to takeaway messages. I'd like each of you to think about what strong takeaway message do you want our listening and viewing audience to know and to think about and perhaps to apply as it relates to your specific area. Lance, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so, I think the key takeaway here and the lessons being learned from COVID is obviously, I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think that's an obvious thing that, I think we need to incorporate. And so but how does that come with regards to innovation? Well, Why do hospitals not have chief innovation officers who are going around trying to figure out and deal with each department and hear from those people that are on the front lines and hear the ideas that they have for improving performance within their own programs and the departments that they run, right? Why is that not a key topic that we have on the discussion at the table every single day when we have a board meeting for these hospitals? So there's so many different ways that technologies and new innovations can motivate and change for real performance improvement. And why not grab that bull by the horns and just ride it, as opposed to, be forced to deal with it after the fact when there are emergencies or crises happening, and now we're trying to deal with these problems and these challenges without having the time that we can use to experiment, to explore, right? And fail fast. You're not going to get to, not every innovative solution is going to be a winner. That's part of what it means to be uncomfortable in the innovative kind of process. And that's why I think it's important to dedicate time and energy within an organization to a specific individual or team that is comfortable being in some place where they're going to fail. As an entrepreneur, I can't tell you how many projects have come and gone that just didn't hit home runs, right? Like Healthy Sim has been around for 10 years, but there's been other projects that only lasted 2. And so I think it's an important kind of note to think about, that this is an area of a little bit of chaos and a little bit of challenge, but the rewards are great for those that are willing to bear down and continue to move forward with trying new things and seeing what works. And I think that people need to take away from this a new way of thinking in terms of incorporating some of that chaos a little bit. Goes a long way, right? If we just kind of invest in that early, it's going to pay in spades for not only crises like this, but just in general through our institutions.
Great. Amy, what's your takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that what we think as far as institutional things that are tried and true and are never going to change, such as clinical learning experiences or hands-on experiences prior to actual practice, are not always going to be there. And the institutions, the academic institutions, have a responsibility to make sure that they are filling those lost opportunities with ones that are of value and that are really going to bring students to the level of graduation. But as well, hospital systems need to be aware of the fact that there is a potential for a struggle as these new graduates are entering the workforce, and they need to put things in place to make sure that their patients are safe and that the frontline workers are prepared and resilient to provide the care that's needed. So I think that there is so much out there to be done, and it's an exciting time. Obviously, all of us are struggling with some of the effects of COVID, but I think as far as being an innovator, this is a great time to be alive and to really be seeing what the opportunity is that's out there for us.
Great. And Judy?
So one of my favorite statements is insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And everybody thinks it came from Einstein. Einstein actually never said that. It came from a book by the name of Sudden Death by Rita Mae Brown. And I think it's really relevant because in hospitals, I think, especially as it relates to vascular access, we do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, right? So we need to break that cycle. We need data to help us break that cycle. And I think it helps us, especially, in times of crisis, that we have to stop doing the same thing over and over again and think that we're going to get a different result, because we're only going to get the same result. So it's really taking data and evidence to drive to change, right? And I think that change, going back to what we were talking about before, makes us proactive. I think we have so much to learn from the COVID crisis. And I think I look forward to all that learning, because it's only going to help everybody get better. It's going to help our healthcare workers get better. It's going to make our institutions stronger. It's going to make us in industry smarter and being able to partner with healthcare. And it's going to, at the end of the rainbow, I think the person that benefits the most from it is the patient, because they're going to get the care they need when they need it. And not have anything else untoward happen to them. So I think for me, that's the North Star that I really want to aspire to, is that we need, at the end of the day, always to think about how this affects the patient in the bed, because that's why we're all here and why we all get up and do what we do.
Exactly. I've always talked about healthcare being a business, but the difference between that and other businesses is that the commodity with which we deal is human lives and human happiness, neither of which should ever be jeopardized. I think that your takeaways were all very strong. It's helpful to have health system partners in innovation, because then you might be able to collaborate on innovation grants or for data gathering or for better insights across different populations. And you addressed that as well, Amy, when you talked about diversity and inclusion. Close collaboration with vendors can enable you to access cross-industry insights and apply their new technologies and solutions to healthcare. And you're right, each of you, at the end of the day, there's a patient in that bed, in that chair, in that home, and that individual is dependent upon each of us to do what is right, to bring them what is needed in terms of innovation and technology and safety, and to ensure a positive outcome. We owe it to them, we owe it to the families, and even more important than ever, we owe it to those professionals who are at the bedside, at the chair side, in the home, in the clinic, providing care and needing technology and innovation that's going to allow them to be their very best, to do the best that they possibly can, and to ensure that we really are caring where care matters most. I want to thank each of you for your perspectives on the innovation concept and how important that is as it relates to products and service. Thanks for being a part of our very important panel. I know that we'll get great reception as a result of this content, and I want to thank each of you for being with me today. Thanks very much for your contribution and for your commitment to the healthcare process, to patients, and to their outcomes.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Sharon.
you.
And now to another equally important facet of innovation, and that is communicating your voice. Now, appropriately, this session is brought to you by Russell Trahan, our friend from PRPR. Russ is the author of Sell Yourself Without Saying a Word. He's the owner and president of PRPR, a public relations firm. He's had public relations experience for the last 20 plus years. He worked with the Disney people. He has degrees in organizational management and psychology. He knows how to persuade people and get your message out. So I'm so happy to welcome you too. Russ, hi.
Hi, thank you.
All right. And then we have Keith Carlson, who is next to me on the top row here. He's a certified career coach, and he is a motivational speaker, a writer, award-winning nurse blogger whose program, The Nurse Keith Show, has now been picked up by the Healthcare Network that has the notables like Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Oz and other people like that. So Keith, we're very happy to have you with us today. Hi.
Thanks for having me, Candy. It's an honor and privilege to be here.
And Kelly Johnson. Kelly is somebody who has had a career in the last 3 years in public relations that has been, when I looked at it, I thought, this is a blur. Kelly is best known because she was Miss Colorado in 2015 and then Miss California in 2018. And if you all recall, she's the gal who wore in 2015 a stethoscope around her neck, and somebody made a snarky comment on The View about what she doing with that doctor stethoscope around her neck, and started an international stethoscope or Nurses United kind of advocacy campaign. So thank you for being with us today, Kelly.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I have known all of you through our travels and our speaking, and I'm just very excited that this is the capper for the day of our day 2, our grand finale last session. So let's just start with Keith. All right, Keith, would you please tell us how in the world did you get into this podcasting thing, and what do people need to know about the role of podcasting in healthcare leadership?
Oh gosh, Candy, thanks for asking. Podcasting is very important these days. It's a very intimate way to reach your audience. You can be between their ears wherever they are, doing laundry, shopping, walking the dog. So it's a very portable medium, and it's really taken off like wildfire these last 10 years. So very briefly, the way I got into it was in 2011, hanging out on Twitter, checking out what people were talking about in nursing. And I met a couple nurses, Kevin Ross and Anna Morrison, and we all eventually hopped on Skype because we liked what each other was saying. And we realized, oh my gosh, this podcasting thing is starting. We don't even know much about it, but within, let's say 2 to 3, 4 weeks, we had formed a company, launched one of the first nursing podcasts on the internet, our RN FM radio. And that show kind of like just took off, and my show eventually spun off of it. But I've been professionally podcasting since 2012, and it's been an interesting journey to say the least.
Gosh, I can't believe that it's been that long. I remember when I first heard you in RN FM radio, I was just scrolling through and I thought, oh my gosh, there's one about nursing.
Right. And now there's so many nursing podcasts and very, very high quality shows. And they're really spanning the spectrum of what nurses can and want to and should be talking about. So the podcasting world in nursing and healthcare is as diverse as the people and the specialties and the interests of all of those people who are hosting those shows and being guests on those shows.
Okay, well, that's a great intro. Kelly,
Yes.
people don't know this, I guess, if they know of your platform, but you have been not only speaking on radio and TV and 80 in-person engagements in these last 3 years, but you are also just about to finish up grad school for your family nurse practitioner degree. Oh my goodness. What have you learned now? What's the biggest thing about advocating for nurses? What's that or been your challenge? Talk to us about what you have been doing.
Sure. So that's correct. I've given 80 public keynote speeches now across all of America. It's been, and one in Australia. It's been so much fun. But for me, finishing my master's in May and now hopefully, completing my doctorate really soon, depending on the pandemic and how everything plays out, is super important to me, because when I am doing these speeches, I want to have credibility behind my name, and I want to have the highest level of education you can have right now in nursing, just because I have so many super experienced nurses that are listening to me. But the advocacy role for me is really, really important. I think it's kind of our duty as nurses to not only advocate for our patients, but to advocate for our profession. So it's really important to me. The challenges that I've faced, honestly, because I'm in school, there's a lot of clinical expectation, and there's a lot of expectation to kind of revert back to primary care as your platform for advocacy. And mine has always been the profession of nursing, not just one specific sector. So for me, that's been my challenge, is kind of navigating being in a primary care setting, but still trying to advocate for the entire profession as a whole. But it's been really great, in keynote speaking, any public speaking opportunities has been a really great way to do that.
Oh, that is so awesome. Isn't it funny that, Florence Nightingale never spoke in public because it wasn't done in those days, but she got her message out surreptitiously because of the family that she was in they were highfalutin political people, and she was friends with all the writers and famous people of the time. So she wrote like 200 books and articles and many, many letters. But of course, I firmly believe that if she were alive today, she'd be doing the kind of work that you and Keith are also doing. Definitely.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I do think that part of my job in nursing advocacy isn't necessarily just advocating for our profession, but it's also empowering other nurses to do the same.
Absolutely. Now, Russ, turning to you, you've made a career of writing and public relations. For those of you who don't know this, Russ and I met. The reason he's here is because we've known each other for a while through the National Speakers Association, and several of our 30 featured speakers this conference in our Global Healthcare Leadership Summit are from the National Speakers Association, and I encourage anybody who's interested to check it out. Listen, what people out there may not know is that you help thought leaders in all areas get their message out. So, Russ, tell us a little bit about what we need to know. Speak to that person who doesn't like to be in front of a camera.
Sure, thank you. Great questions. And it kind of took me back to what you were saying about Florence Nightingale, how she didn't do much public speaking, but she did a lot of writing. She did a lot of letters, and she did a lot, because that's really what we specialize in at PRPR. We work exclusively with, as you said, thought leaders, professional speakers, consultants, and nonfiction authors. So you won't get mixed in with a vampire romance novel if you work at PRPR. So we really do work with those thought leaders to position their content in front of their target market. And we do this through niche publications, a lot of trade and industry publications, a lot of association journals, medical journals. I mean, it's not all, sweet and sexy and well known, but it's the ones that are being read by your target audience. One of the publications we work with in particular only has a circulation of 600 people. Now you may say, I want the 6 million people that read Entrepreneur Magazine every month. But those 600 people are all hospital administrators. And if that's your audience, it's more important to be in front of those 600 than it is the 6 million. You may not be able to brag to your friends and family, hey, I was in, this hospital administrators magazine. They may never hear of it, but it's still, it's as we often say, are you interested in building your business or building your ego? Is it about getting your content across or getting famous? And that's the niche that we work with to help people achieve that goal of getting their content in front of a targeted market.
Well, thank you for saying that, Russ, because I think that a lot of people who might be listening are thinking, as I thought before I started talking to you, that the only way to get an article out there is through a peer-reviewed journal. And because as an academic, I mean, that's just where we're pushed to go. And I must admit that although I've been published several times, a lot of people don't read those things, or they're not for patient advocacy only in the academic sense, but what Callie and Keith are doing, they're getting the message out there. So in terms of the healthcare leader who may want to be writing more, let's say, about self-care or general public policy kinds of articles, is that the kind of thing that you could help them get published from?
Definitely. That's the kind of content that we work with. The articles themselves are not advertorial. They're not self-promotional. The articles are content driven, educational, informational. Editors love bullet points. Editors love numbers. 5 myths of this, 6 ways of doing this better, 7 steps to improving X. So yeah, it's a matter of putting your content into a format that the reader wants to hear and then drawing them back to you for the rest of the story. Probably many in your audience know Leanne Tiemann.
Oh,
yeah,
she's speaking.
Oh, she's wonderful. We love her. She's a former client of PRPR's. We worked with her many years ago when she first released Chicken Soup for the Caregiver's Soul. And there's obviously the caregiver market and the healthcare market for her book, but we also helped her open up a whole market involving the workplace and caregivers' impact on the workplace. And we had her write articles on ways a boss can work with a caregiver who maybe has to come in late or has to leave early and has to, her colleague, the caregiver's colleague, has to pick up an extra workload because the caregiver may not be there all the time. And it's just a new way to look at it and open up a whole new market for her through the written word.
Exactly. And that reminds me, Kelly, not many of us are going to be able to approach advocacy for the profession like you have. Do you have any tips to give us so that we might be heard?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest one for me was joining a professional organization because I'm not a bedside registered nurse right now. I do 180 hours, so I definitely still get to see patients as an FNP. But for me, it was being involved in an organization that was bigger than myself. But if I was bedside, there's also those opportunities within administration and leadership roles within your own system. So anytime you have an opportunity to be a part of a committee or to sit in on a meeting, anytime a nurse can be involved in a conversation that's higher level and that might impact policy or procedure at any level, whether it's in the hospital or legislative, I think that's really, really important to do. So take those opportunities 100%. And then if you can find a professional organization, a nursing association, anything like that, that's important to you, that you find that you align with and their values and what they're trying to do with their initiatives, that's also a fantastic way to be involved.
Well, that's a great point because, there's over 350 nursing organizations. I know I have 6 of them myself.
Yeah, it has to be one you feel like that aligns with what you want to do and what you really want to see in the profession. It doesn't need to be the most popular one. You can even start your own, but I really think being involved with like-minded people and having meetings with people who also feel strongly and want to make a change for your profession for the better, I think you feel a little bit more motivated.
That reminds me, Keith, in terms of talking with people that have common interests, it sounds like a perfect job is what you're doing because you are talking to people who are like-minded all the time. How do you get your ideas about who do you reach out to and what do our healthcare leaders need to know about maybe contacting you, or how does this work?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of people reach out to me because they've heard the show or heard about the show, and they make a pitch to me about being a guest, which is a privilege and an honor and very humbling that people would reach out to me and want to be on my little show. So that's lovely. And I also just keep my ears and eyes open for people I think are doing interesting things, innovative things, and they don't have to have an enormous audience. Like Russ just said, a person who has a small, dedicated, targeted audience is just as important as the person who has an enormous worldwide audience. It's just a different type of audience. And just to piggyback on what Kelly was just saying about speaking up in your own organization, like going to a meeting with management or administration, Kelly, and it comes back to that same old, it's a cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason, because we say them a lot and they have meaning. That if you don't have a seat at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And I think that's something that nurses have needed to learn. And part of the purpose of my writing and my speaking and the coaching that I do, and also the podcast, is to teach nurses, one, skills about how to present themselves out in the world, and two, to open their eyes to the different things that are happening out there. That healthcare is not a monolith. It's not one thing that people do. It's not all acute care. It's not all emergency or ICU or the really sexy things. It's also the down and dirty things like school nursing and street nursing and going out and working with the homeless. There's so many different issues we can each align ourselves with. And when it comes to advocacy, podcasting's great. I mean, anyone can launch a podcast. It's a fairly simple thing to do, though it does have a lot of moving parts. But I often say to people, if you have something you want to say, a letter to the editor is a great way to get published. Write letters to the editor and educate your local community. And I'm also fairly politically active, and I've met with my legislators. I've gone and done activities at the Roundhouse here in New Mexico. That's what we call it, because it's a round building where the legislature is. And we go during legislative sessions and we advocate with the New Mexico Nurses Association. And there's plenty of ways for you to reach people. And you don't have to even start a blog or launch a website. You can write articles on LinkedIn or Medium and get the word out there and share your thought leadership. So you don't have to have an enormous platform to have an impact. And you never know whether it's a podcast, a Facebook post, a tweet, or a conversation with a legislator at the state level or the national level that can have a small impact, but that can also ripple out. And you have no notion how far that can go. So whatever the medium happens to be, that's the place where you want to sink your teeth in and see what you can do as a nurse and advocate.
You know, that is such a good advice. Thank you. And it reminds me of a great segue into something that I was going to ask Russell. Russell, you train people of all sorts about their brand and their image and their platform. What do you want to add about that?
It's a matter of consistency. It's a great question because it really needs to be a matter of consistency. People need to be able to recognize whatever they're, whether they're on LinkedIn, Facebook, a podcast, an article, your website, Instagram, whatever you're using, they need to be able to recognize that it's you right away. That's very key in making sure that your brand is secure and that people are going to know it's you. It's also a question I get quite often with the articles we place. People will often say, well, you're writing the articles, aren't you? I'm not writing. And no, actually, the client, the author really should write their own article. It needs to be in your voice. It needs to represent you. So whether they hear you on a podcast and then find you on LinkedIn and read one of your articles, it's all the same voice. It all has that consistency to it. So that's my number one piece of advice, is make sure your brand is consistent and recognizable within 3 seconds, regardless of the platform.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And that reminds me of something I wanted to ask Kelly. Now, there are some people who unfortunately have stereotyped nurses into roles that we here don't really like to recognize. And as a person who's been in 2 Miss America pageants, how are you pushing back against that kind of sexy nurse stereotype?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And just right before I answered, I wanted to piggyback off of something that Keith said, because you mentioned having a seat at the table. And I just wanted to say that's so important, because in nursing specifically, sometimes people don't feel like they have a seat at the table, that they can't be a part of that conversation. So just very briefly, I wanted to empower anyone that's listening that you absolutely do. Anything involving healthcare, you do have a seat at that table. You should be involved in that conversation. So don't be afraid to speak up. But yes, Candy, thank you so much for asking me about that, because it's so important that people recognize not only do we have more than 300,000 men in nursing, so this sexualized nursing image makes absolutely zero sense, especially what we all can think of when we think of what it actually looks like. It doesn't make much sense. And the way that I have tried to fight back against that is taking at least 10 minutes of my hour-long keynotes to actually speak to it. So after I did the Miss America competition, people dressed as Nurse Kelly for Halloween. And that's what I've used to kind of jumpstart this entire other campaign about changing that Halloween costume and changing that image of us in media, because over 250 people dressed as Nurse Kelly just that year. And they were going around in scrubs and a stethoscope, what we actually wear. And so not only were people probably saying, oh, are you a doctor, at their specific events? And that was an opportunity for them to say, no, I'm Nurse Kelly. Nurses, this is what nurses wear. Maybe you should go watch her monologue, which of course the message was, you're never just a nurse. So it's hopefully an empowering and inspiring message. But having people dress as nurses and wear what we actually wear is the first part of the problem. But then of course, it's also changing the public stigma. It's also changing and bridging that gap between what we actually do and kind of what the public sees us do in media. And so we have to be a part of that, though. We can't just expect people who aren't in healthcare to understand how serious and vital the role of a nurse is in healthcare, because all they're seeing and being fed and consuming are images in the media that are absolutely not what we look like and not how we act and not what our job is. So it is on us a little bit to change that mentality and to give them the real information and to educate them on what nurses actually do, how important we are, what our education looks like, and what our true role in healthcare is as well. I think people should know that that's not what we really wear when they see the sexy Halloween costume. But if we can continue to fight against it even being something in existence, especially for our fellow male colleagues, I think that's at least a starting point.
Definitely. Did you want to add something to that, Keith?
I did, or I do. So I believe those tropes and those cliches definitely aren't helpful for us, those stereotypes. And people like Kelly are pushing back against them from a very large platform. And we can push back from our tiny little platforms too, just person to person in the course of our day. And it's so interesting to me how the pandemic is starting to change the conversation around nursing, because the media generally turns to doctors, physicians, surgeons when something happens out there in the world and they want a healthcare voice. So there are opportunities, and we need to also create more opportunities for nurses to be the ones that reporters and journalists turn to ask questions of, because nurses have something to say as well. And the irony here is that we've been voted the most trustworthy, honest professionals in the United States through the Gallup poll every year for what, 19 years now, right? So 2002, right after the 9/11 debacle that happened in New York City and elsewhere in the country, firefighters won that, and that was wonderful, and it was well deserved. And the thing is that nurses are seen as trustworthy and honest, but oftentimes the public and the media and journalists don't know what we actually do. They don't really know because they get it from movies and TV shows, and they don't know what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. And some people don't know what a nurse practitioner is. And obviously a lot of people don't know what a doctor of nursing practice is. So there's a lot of work to do here on a person-to-person basis of educating people what nurses do. And I circle back to that simple thing of talking to legislators, talking to your neighbors, speaking at the local library, writing letters to the editor. So we can change that conversation, and we all have to change it individually and collectively so that people will start to get the message. And one thing I want to point out is that there's an organization called HARO, HARO, and it's Help a Reporter Out. And anyone can register for HARO and receive pitches for journalists looking for people or experts and professionals to offer something to a conversation or to a report. And it's a great way to get on a journalist's electronic Rolodex so that you can be one of those experts that journalist reaches out to when something happens out there in the world. So I think Kelly's doing it from that huge platform. Candy, you are too, and everyone can play their part. And you just have to find the place where you're comfortable.
Well, thank you for that. That is so true. With the caveat that
Sorry, Candy, can I add to that real quick?
Please do.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just as Keith and Kelly were talking, I'm sitting here thinking, and we've talked about trade magazines and industry publications and professional association journals, but there are also community newspapers and neighborhood magazines that are always hungry for content, that are always looking, for educational information to fill those column inches. And Keith was what he was just saying just got me thinking, you could write an article on, do you really need a doctor? And set up the type of different nurses that there are, and when it's, when you could really use that nurse, a nurse practitioner, a doctor, a doctor practice?
Doctor of nursing practice.
A doctor of nursing practice, and explain what the difference is between each of these types of nurses. Make it, very content driven, not self-promotional. Say, this is what they do, this is what they don't do, and present that to the editors of these community newspapers and these neighborhood magazines to really help get the word out at a grassroots level that maybe you don't always need a doctor. A nurse can do this job better. So, they're just an article idea for you to help get the word out. So.
Terrific. So Kelly, you want to add to that about the recent legislation that has just passed in California?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So nurse practitioners can practice autonomously out here. And that comes with a lot of caveats. So it's very exciting because there are a lot of studies, and there's evidence-based that nurse practitioners in primary care have either the same or better outcomes when it comes to patient care than physicians. And it's not, I don't want it to be a competition, but I think it does speak to the validity and the abilities of nurse practitioners when it comes to primary care. But yeah, that is really exciting. And it does come with caveats. I'm sure there are going to be clinic hours and preceptor hours and things that we're going to have to fulfill. But the fact that we're being recognized as being able to be autonomous and trusted that our practice is valid and is absolutely able to fulfill the needs of the public patient population, that's a really exciting time. But yeah, I think since I was at Miss America over the last 5 years, the strides that nursing has taken in legislation, whether it's safe staffing ratios or autonomy for NPs, whatever it might be, we have the fact that we're finding this voice is just so exciting. Nursing has had a ginormous microphone given to us over the last 5 years, and the pandemic, I think, accelerated the public's opinion of that and their trust in us, and also their ability to understand truly how much we're needed and how vital we are. I think sometimes we're taken a little bit for granted or maybe underappreciated. And I think that has absolutely changed, especially in the last 7 months. So it is exciting to see legislation change. I'm always at our end day. I know, Candy, that's where we met for the first time, but it's important that nurses have a voice in legislation and that, the people who are making those decisions hear us and understand that we exist and that we're really not going anywhere.
Right.
And for those nurses who don't know, healthcare legislation does, if you haven't gotten involved with the American Nurses Association or any of your other associations that do advocate and go up, like Keith said, to your local capital and advocate, you really should. It takes a long time, but now I believe it's California is about the 29th state now that allows autonomy as nurse practitioners. And Keith, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Kelly a question. So Kelly, with that change in California and with the ways in which nurses are starting to be featured in the news more in relation to the pandemic, there's been interviews on CNN or NBC or whatever, we see nurses talking about their experiences of the pandemic. Do you feel that there is a sea change happening in terms of the public seeing the value of nurses vis-a-vis the pandemic and how we've been more out front and, we've been on the cutting edge of the care of pandemic patients, of COVID patients?
I absolutely think so. I think it's still going to take some time. I just think that because of those media images we were talking about earlier, that I think it's a very steep hill that we're starting to climb up, but I definitely do see everything changing. I mean, one of my good friends, Katie Duke, who's a nurse practitioner, gave an award at the Emmys the other night. I mean, we are definitely being asked to do more things in the media. And I think that a lot of big brands that wanted to put out any sort of campaign about the pandemic chose to use nurses. Now, I wonder what their reason for that was. Was it nurses are sweet and kind and we want to, or was it, no, these are powerhouse men and women who are absolutely changing care? So I do wonder, and I'm excited either way to see us being featured more often. But I do think that the pandemic has not only given people kind of a sense of really how serious our job is and how much we're putting ourselves at risk to be on the front line, but also how absolutely essential nurses are and how this pandemic, we wouldn't be getting out of it at all if it wasn't for us. And so I do think that people are starting to value us a little bit more and maybe possibly be a little bit more grateful. And I'm hoping that continues to spiral into understanding our role even better too.
Well, this has been a fantastic panel, and I hate to cut us short, but we only have about a minute and a half left. So, Keith, what's your last 30 seconds?
My last 30 seconds is to tell nurses that you have the power and wherewithal to be able to speak out, and you can speak out at any level you choose, whether it's just to a colleague or not just, or to an administrator where you work, or to a reporter or a legislator in your city, town, or state, that you can use that platform, that megaphone is yours to grab if you choose to grab it, and I recommend that you do.
Okay, Kelly, last thoughts?
Yes, my last thoughts are hopefully just to inspire anyone that's listening to continue to move forward within your profession and to understand that, especially in nursing, there are so many different ways to be involved now. There's so many different levels of education we can have. And it's a really, really exciting time to be in nursing. A new enthusiasm has sort of been ignited within our profession. And it's so important that everyone knows how appreciated that you are, how valued you are, and how thankful we are that you are doing the job, especially to our frontline, all of our frontline workers throughout this pandemic. Just thank you so much. Keep going. We so see you, we hear you, and we need you. So thank you.
Thank you. Russ, put it all together for us, will you?
You bet. Publicity 101. Know who your target market is and where they are. What magazines do they read? What podcasts do they listen to? What blogs do they read? Know who they are and where they are, and position your content in front of them. It's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about your content and what you can do for them. It's the whip 'em. You know, what can you do for me? That's what you want to know who they are and position in front of them. That's it.
Thank you all. And for all the attendees, these three speakers are going to be joining you in the chat room and in the speaker roundtable. So stay tuned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.